Chapter 45:18. Yimulin was silent for a long time. It was so long that she couldn't help it anymore. She whispered, "Yimulin, do you not want me to go? Why would I?" He came back to his senses and looked down at his wife in his arms. She was looking up at him with a layer of mist in her eyes. Her expression was a little dissatisfied and there was a trace of care. He was angry, amused and distressed at the same time. How old was Shweli? He was still like a little girl. He reached out to rub her hair and Shweli asked, "Then why do you look like that?" Yimulin still looked at her with a smile. After a long time he asked in a low voice, "Then tell me, what do you know?" Shweli bit her lower lip. After a long while she finally said, "You don't like me anymore." "I don't know anything." You know what you don't know." Yimulin pretended to be surprised. Then she reached out her hand and hit him a few times as if she wanted to vent her anger. He laughed. Then she blushed and didn't say anything. She just lay there. Yimulin couldn't bear to keep teasing her. He said in a low voice, "Shweli, I'm afraid that you'll feel bored and tired. You'll feel that life with me is so boring. So I'd rather you wait for me at home. At least there's an." "I know." Her voice was also low. "But I want to be with you, Yimulin. I always feel that we don't have enough time." After a while she said softly, "I want to be with you." He didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and kissed her cheek. "I'm going to make breakfast." "Yimulin." She called his name. Yimulin chuckled in a low voice and patted her. "I'm going abroad for about 10 days next month. You can go with me and it's not as busy as it is now. Let's take it as a honeymoon." He had already gotten up. He casually put on a pair of trousers and a gray sweater. It was very comfortable. She looked at him and said, "You're going to work." He laughed. "Then you don't want to go?" He walked out of the living room and looked like he was going downstairs. Shweli sat there, her hair a mess. She shouted at his back, "Yimulin, it's not like I don't want to go. I'm in a hurry." Yimulin smiled. "Take a nap. I'll leave at 1 in the afternoon." In fact, it was getting late. It was almost 10 o'clock. He would have to leave in 3 hours. Perhaps by the time he returned, it would already be late at night. Shweli didn't know why, but she couldn't bear to let him go. She ran over and hugged him without thinking too much. "Yimulin." Her voice was low. "I'm sorry." Her voice was choked with emotion as she spoke. Yimulin's back tensed up. After a while he wanted to turn around, but she didn't let him. She hugged him tightly and apologized again. He smiled helplessly and gently. He grabbed her hand. "How many times do I have to say I'm sorry, Shirley? After so many years I've long gotten used to this kind of life. Maybe it's just that I'm a little busy, but you're the one who can't let go." With that said, he pulled her back into his arms and lowered his head to kiss her. "In the future you'll follow me wherever I go. As long as Anan doesn't have any objections, it's fine." With that said, he reached out and touched her eyelids. He said gently, "You're already a mother, but you're still like a little girl. You cry so often." Chapter 45:19. Shweli bit her lip and said softly, "I'm a little girl." He smiled and reached out to touch her little head. His voice was very soft. "You're my little girl." With that, he felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. He hugged her and carried her back to the bed in the master bedroom. "Be a good girl. Sleep for a while more." Shweli looked at him. "I'll make breakfast with you, okay?" Yimulin smiled. "Just lie down. I'll do it." As he said that, he pressed her shoulder and looked at her for a few seconds before going downstairs. However, Shweli couldn't fall asleep. She lay on the pillow for a long time before she decided to get up. She put on a coat and went downstairs. She heard noises coming from the kitchen. She walked over and hugged Yimulin from behind. Her voice was like a little lamb. "Yimulin, you haven't cooked for me for a long time." He smiled and said in a low voice, "I've been busy." He paused and whispered, "Do you want me to cook for you all the time? I want you to stay at home all the time. You don't have to work so hard." Shweli put her face on his back. Her voice was still like a little lamb's. Yimulin smiled and made breakfast for her. If it was many years ago, he would never have thought that he would be willing to make breakfast for a woman, let alone when he was so busy. In the past he was also busy. When he was a lawyer he was definitely not as busy as he was now. This was probably because she was willing to do it. She kept hugging him like a little girl and he enjoyed it very much. They hugged each other quietly as if they could hug each other until the end of time. Early in the morning, Ainan went downstairs to get a bottle of milk. However, she saw her parents when she went downstairs. Here they come again. Ainan stood there and admired for a while. She thought about it and went to get a bottle of milk. Good morning, Mom and Dad. You can continue. She could only drink the milk and go back to sleep. It was already past 9 o'clock. It was really hard for her to force an energetic child to go back to sleep. Mr. Yi said calmly, "Wait outside. It'll be ready in a while." His rice worm's face was very red. She pointed at the pot. "What about this? What do you mean?" Mr. Yi smiled. "Wait outside." Bai Shuali went out pitifully. After a while she came back again. "Do you want me to help you wash it?" "You can." There was a hint of a smile in his eyes. "Stop messing around. Go out and play by yourself." Only then did she nod in satisfaction. After walking out for a while she turned around and said, "By the way, Mulan, I've invited Xiangnan Yi Hui Yi Huan and their mothers this afternoon." Mr. Yi took a sip of milk and raised his eyebrows. "Isn't it said that Qin Mo is on his honeymoon?" "That's why I called He Huan over," Bai Shuali said matter-of-factly. Yi Mulan smiled. He really didn't know what to do with her. But no matter what, he still doted on her. She couldn't tell what was good about him, but it was probably good everywhere. Like new wife number 1, "Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering." New wife number 1. "Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering." Hit bar was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-20. But no matter what, he doted on her. She couldn't tell what was good about him, but she guessed that he was good everywhere. Perhaps he wasn't as good as others, but no matter how good others were, they weren't her. Also, how could he bear to compare her with others? Yi Mulan smiled and continued to make breakfast. He was impatient for lunch, so he called the servants to come back and make it while he spent a beautiful morning with his wife. There was no scheming, no endless work. There was only Ainan. At noon, Yi Mulan answered a phone call to discuss some business matters. When he came out of the study, he saw Bai Shuali on the phone. He sat down and naturally wrapped his arms around her shoulders, listening to what she was saying. Bai Shuali didn't give up, so she called He Huan again and tried to invite He Huan over. "Sit together." Yi Mulan looked at his little wife disapprovingly and gave her a look. However, Bai Shuali ignored him and continued to talk to He Huan with great interest. In fact, she was not very familiar with He Huan in the past, but among the people Bai Shuali knew, He Huan was a very interesting person. She usually looked serious, but she could get angry easily sometimes. When Yuan was too gentle and wouldn't fall for it. So He Huan was a little more interesting. Actually, Bai Shuali didn't dare to offend when Yuan because old Bai would get even with her. Her husband was looking at her, so she couldn't make the call. She couldn't convince He Huan at all, mainly because He Huan had a very possessive husband behind her. She hung up the phone and pouted. "Yi Mulan, I lost a lot of fun after marrying you." He raised his eyebrows, looked at her and let out a long "oh" sound. "Really? I wonder who was the one who said that she was sorry and wanted to make it up to me. Now it's no fun?" "That's because I want to meet He Huan. Didn't you see that she's on the hot search? She's so beautiful now. Women talk about beauty when they get together." Bai Shuali was very righteous. Yi Mulan pressed the remote control and said casually, "They're newlyweds now." "We're newlyweds now too." Bai Shuali bit her lower lip. "We've only been married for a few years." "Only?" He was shocked and looked at her for a long time. "Only a few years? How old is Ainan?" "Bai Shuali?" "She's still a child," Bai Shuali shouted. Yi Mulan smiled and patted her little head. "You're also a child." She looked at him. Yi Mulan blinked and chuckled softly. She didn't know why he smiled like that, but Bai Shuali's face turned red. Then she rested her little head on his breast and looked at him from time to time. Yi Mulan was still smiling as he caressed her little head. His voice was unbelievably gentle. "I've already said that you're a child." Then the child threw herself into his arms and treated herself as a child. After He Huan hung up Bai Shuali's call, she looked at Qin Mo with a puzzled expression. "Bai Shuali really likes to look for me these days." Qin Mo chuckled and said with a smile, "Maybe she likes you very much." He Huan was not silly. She looked at him. "Is that so?" He smiled and lowered his head to kiss her. "I'll go pick up Yi Huan and send her over." You can go with me. We can go out and play later. You can leave Yi Huan there for a night. Something happened at home. I'll update tomorrow. Like new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. My mobile phone updates are the fastest. Chapter 45-21. Yi Huan looked at him. Won't Yi Huan be a bother if she stays there? Chinamo smiled faintly. He took her coat and put it on for her. Then he put on one for himself and went to the Chiu garden to pick up Yi Huan. They were going to send her over, but they received a call from Su Cheng, who asked them to go back for dinner. In the end, they picked up Yi Huan and let her play at the Yi family for the whole afternoon. In the afternoon, Yi Huan and Chinamo went to watch a movie. It was a low-budget foreign movie called Munich. After watching it, Yi Huan walked out and didn't say anything. They walked together. Chinamo was very tall, making Yi Huan look very petite. He looked down and saw that she didn't say anything, so he bumped her with his shoulder. What are you thinking about? Yi Huan pursed her lips and said in a low voice, Cat's Eye's score is 9. 6. Dubon's score is 8. 2, but there are so few showtimes. Chinamo smiled. I can't do anything about that. Some movies are like that. They sell well but don't sell well, especially some artistic movies. Yi Huan glanced at him and said in a low voice, I think I'm the one who got hurt. Chinamo smiled. Your movie. He reached out and touched her face. It's selling well. Yi Huan was a little speechless. He felt like a little pet. She looked up at him. Chinamo, are you comforting me? He thought for a moment and then smiled. It's obvious, isn't it? Yi Huan glared at him. She looked cute and funny. Chinamo reached out and stroked her little head. Then he held her hand. Let's go and pick up Yi Huan. Mom and Dad should be waiting for us for dinner. Yi Huan nodded. Then she looked down at his hand that was holding hers, feeling a little dazed. His big hand was holding her little hand. It was very warm and strong, as if it would last a lifetime. Yi Huan felt a warm current in her heart. It was an indescribable feeling. Then she murmured yes. Chinamo smiled and took her to the car. He picked up Yi Huan and went back to Yi Huan's parents' home. Uncle Kaim and Su Cheng were preparing food at home. When they were almost done, Chinamo and Yi Huan came back with Yi Huan. It was the 3rd day of the Lunar New Year. In the distance, there was the sound of firecrackers like the water in a pot that was about to boil. It was very lively. Chinamo opened the door and got out of the car. Yi Huan and Yi Huan got out of the car while he took out the New Year's goods from the trunk. There weren't many of them, only 2 boxes, but they were all high-quality goods that were hard to find. Chinamo carried it in and saw that Su Cheng was talking to Yi Huan, while Yi Huan was playing with Uncle Kaim. Dad, Mom. Chinamo smiled and walked over to put the things away. Although they were remarried now, Su Cheng still looked indifferent. You're here. Chinamo smiled and looked at Uncle Kaim. Dad, shall we play after dinner? Uncle Kaim smiled faintly. Sure, but don't let me win. Dad is the better one. Uncle Kaim still smiled faintly at Chinmo's compliment. Of course, he knew that it was just a compliment. At this time, Su Cheng went to the kitchen to have a look and asked the servants to serve the dishes. After dinner, Yi Huan and Su Cheng whispered to each other while Chinmo and Uncle Kaim went to play chess. They sat together on the sofa with the heater turned on. Occasionally they would chat for a while. After half the night, Chinmo and Yi Huan wanted to leave at 10 o'clock. However, Yi Huan was asleep. Moreover, Su Cheng insisted that Yi Huan should stay, so Chinmo agreed after thinking about it. Then he looked at Yi Huan as if asking for her opinion. Yi Huan felt sorry for Yi Huan. After thinking about it, she agreed to let her stay. However, when she got into the car, she was a little hesitant. As she fastened her seatbelt, she turned to look at him. Why don't we take Yi Huan back? It's not good to let her stay here all day, is it? President Qin, who wanted to spend time with his wife, smiled. He reached out and rubbed his wife's little head. His voice was full of doting. Why not? Is your mother not as good at taking care of the child as you are? Or is my mother not as good at taking care of the child as you are? Yi Huan glared at him. You're attacking a chicken. Am I? Chinmo smiled lazily. I'm just telling the truth. Am I that bad? Yi Huan snorted and looked ahead. Chinmo smiled and started the car. Yi Huan looked at the black carved door in front of them slowly opening. After a while she turned her head and asked him, Where are we going now? Chinmo smiled. Back to the condominium. Just the two of us. Qin Mo's slender fingers held the steering wheel as he focused on driving. The car slowly drove back to their condominium. Qin Mo turned off the engine and turned his head. It's 11 o'clock. Do you want to go to the bar? Mr. Qin, you just said that you're not young anymore. It's better for the elderly to go to bed early. He Huan snorted. What do you think, President Qin? New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45:22. After a long while she said in a low voice, Qin Mo, you're shameless. Hearing that, he laughed softly, his voice hoarse. She's my wife. It's okay to be shameless. He Huan rolled her eyes at him again and opened the car door to get out. Qin Mo followed behind, lighting a cigarette as he walked. However, he put it away after 2 puffs and caught up with He Huan. She was waiting for him at the elevator door. After Qin Mo went over, the elevator door closed. He looked down at her. He Huan was disgusted. You just smoked. You're not allowed to kiss me. As she said that, she pressed against his shoulder. The more she behaved like this, the happier he was. He said in a low voice, it's not like you haven't begged me before. Have you forgotten? As he said that, his tall figure formed a sharp contrast with her petite figure. His gaze was also clear and bright, while He Huan was as weak as a small animal. Her face was red and her voice was even weaker. Qin, he smiled and reached out to rub her little head. Silly girl. Perhaps it was because she looked really cute. After a long time the elevator arrived. He Huan opened her eyes, which were filled with stars. The life of an old couple was of course a little boring. Qin Mo went home to deal with some work. He Huan showered and got ready to sleep. However, at 1 o'clock at night Qin Mo was still not back. She woke up, looked at the empty pillow and then sat up. It was dark all around. The heater was turned on a little and the temperature was very comfortable. However, Qin Mo was not around. He Huan lifted the blanket and walked out of the bedroom in her pajamas. Finally, she found Qin Mo in the study. The study was filled with the smell of cigarettes. Qin Mo held a cigarette in one hand and held his phone in the other, making a call. At this moment he looked gloomy, as if there was something difficult to solve. He looked up at He Huan and said a few words on the phone before hanging up. Then he asked her, "Why are you up?" He Huan went over and leaned against him gently. Her voice was a little low. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Qin Mo said hoarsely, "Something happened." With that said, he stroked her soft hair again. "Go to sleep first. I'll solve it." Intuition told He Huan that this matter had something to do with her, so she stubbornly stared at him, unwilling to go to sleep. Qin Mo smiled faintly and said in a hoarse voice, "Are you disobedient now?" He Huan was still stubborn. "You just won't listen." Her expression made him smile. His eyebrows relaxed as if all his worries had vanished into thin air. "Go to sleep. I'll take care of everything," Qin Mo whispered. He Huan bit her lip. What happened? He thought about it and finally decided to tell her. However, he didn't say it immediately. Instead, he chose to get a coat for her and settled her on the sofa. He opened the window and came back to pour her a cup of hot cocoa. Sitting opposite her, Qin Mo thought for a moment and said, "There's a problem with the release of Twin. Someone said that the second female lead, AI Mengmeng, has a history of smoking LSD. You know that the higher-ups have zero tolerance for this, so the problem is very troublesome." He Huan was stunned for a moment. After a while she said, "AI Mengmeng has quit the entertainment industry. Like new wife number 1, hubby addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1, hubby addicted to spoiling." The updates were the fastest. Chapter 45:23. But her films are still there. Logically speaking, they should all be taken off the shelves. Qin Mo said very rationally and objectively, "Unless we delete all her scenes now. But the problem is that it doesn't matter if AI Mingming's scenes are removed, the entire film will lose a lot of scenes of other important characters." He looked at He Huan, resisting the urge to smoke, and said calmly, "I'll try my best to keep the schedule and AI Mingming's scenes. This will not only affect the film but also her personally." In fact, he had already removed several hot searches today, but there would always be new ones. They were all negative news about Twin and AI Mengmeng. It was obvious that someone had bought them. After hearing Qin Mo's words, He Huan was stunned for a while before she calmed down. What will happen if the approval department rejects it? The release will be delayed. But it will have a huge impact on the box office. Qin Mo's voice was a bit cruel. Indie films don't sell well in the first place. With this wave of impact, you can imagine the consequences. He Huan also knew how cruel it was for AI Meng Meng. AI Meng Meng would not take the initiative to touch it unless she was crazy. He Huan actually knew that AI Meng Meng would not take the initiative to touch it. She looked at Qin Mo, hoping that he could help. After all, this was her hard work, and AI Meng Meng and Rong Yu were married. Qin Mo looked at her pitiful expression and smiled. It's rare for you to beg, Mrs. Qin. I'm not begging. He Huan snorted. I just think you can help. Qin Mo held a cigarette between his fingers and played with it gently. After a while, he said in a low voice, if this was easy, I wouldn't be up in the middle of the night. He Huan, when have you ever seen me like this? He Huan bit her lip and looked at him. He smiled and reached out to touch her hair. I'll try my best. If we can't get along well, we'll think of another way. By the way, do you still have the film? I mean the original one that hasn't been cut? He Huan nodded. Yes, I also took part in the cutting. I have a set in my apartment. Qin Mo stood up. Give me a set of your keys. I'll go get it. He Huan also stood up. Qin Mo, it's already past 1 o'clock. Qin Mo smiled faintly. It's already the 25th of January today. There are only 14 days until the premiere. How long do you think it will take if we rearrange it? He Huan was speechless for a moment. After a while he said, Qin Mo, this is too tiring. He smiled and his voice was a little hoarse. This is nothing. Although he played it down, He Huan knew how much effort it took to edit a film. Besides, this film wasn't shot by Qin Mo. Then she thought of a question and coughed. Qin Mo, do you know how to do it? Qin Mo looked at her with a hint of amusement in his eyes. You're asking me if I know how to do it. He Huan felt that she was talking about cutting the film, but Qin Mo didn't mean it that way. She blushed and pretended not to hear it. Qin Mo smiled, took her keys and drove out. When he came back, He Huan was still leaning on the sofa in the study, asleep. He put down the things in his hands and walked over quietly. He carefully carried her up and put her on the bed in the master bedroom. He Huan woke up immediately. She opened her eyes and asked him, You're back? He nodded and reached out to gently stroke her hair. I'll watch for a while. You go to sleep first. She remembered that he still pressed her down and kissed her. His voice was especially gentle. Be good, go to sleep first. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-24. He Huan wanted to accompany him, but she was too sleepy. She opened her eyes for a while before closing them again. Qin Mo accompanied her for a while before taking his things to the study. He closed the door and switched off the heater. Wearing only a thin sweater, he sat in front of the computer, took out a thick master tape and imported it. Qin Mo had never taken a professional course, but he had taken a private course for about half a year. He felt that it wasn't bad. However, He Huan's body couldn't handle such a heavy workload. Moreover, it was the Lunar New Year, so it wasn't practical to get staff to work overtime. Moreover, Qin Mo knew that this was He Huan's hard work, so he had to do it himself. In the dimly lit study, Qin Mo lit a cigarette and drank a cup of coffee. He spent the whole night and early in the morning reading the master tape. He then watched the edited version of Twin and had a rough idea of what He Huan was trying to express. There was a cigarette between his slender fingers, and he slowly took a puff as he stared at the blue screen. Smoke filled the air. He looked at the screen while writing something. It wasn't until 10 o'clock in the morning that he raised his tired eyes. He Huan opened the door and choked. Qin Mo, how many cigarettes did you smoke last night? Qin Mo looked at it and smiled. I think I had 2 packs. He Huan stared at him. Qin Mo smiled. Why are you looking at me? Then he looked at He Huan. Let's look for Rong Yu later. He Huan was puzzled. Why? Qin Mo smiled. I heard that Rong Yu wrote a documentary for AI Meng Meng. Maybe the script can be released earlier, but AI Meng Meng will have to work a little harder. You too, I hope that you will be in charge of the filming. As for the editing, leave it to me. He Huan looked straight at him. Sounds very professional. Of course. Chin-mo smiled and took his coat. He didn't look like he was going to wash it. He was really in a hurry. However, Hee-hwan couldn't let him work so hard. She bit her lip and said, Chin-mo, you should sleep first. You can go in the afternoon. Chin-mo looked at her with his bright eyes. After a while, he murmured, Are you worried about Mrs. Chin? Hee-hwan bit her lips and looked at him. Chin-mo said in a low voice, Say something. Hee-hwan bit her lips again. After a while she said in a low voice, Yes, I am. Chin-mo looked at her for a long time and then took off his jacket. He pinched her face and said in a low voice, I'll listen to you. I'll sleep first. A good man should take care of his body and give his woman happiness, right, Mrs. Chin? Hee-hwan blushed. After a long while she said in a low voice, Why are you bringing this up again? How shameless. Chin-mo smiled and went to the kitchen to make some food. After they finished eating, he asked Mrs. Chin to take a nap with him. However, they only slept for about 3 hours. They woke up at 1 in the afternoon and went to Rong Yu's place after eating a simple meal. On the way, secretary he called. Chin-mo was driving, so he asked Hee-hwan to pick it up. Answer it, it's secretary he. It should be about AI Meng. Oh, Hee-hwan answered. When secretary he heard Hee-hwan's voice, he paused for a moment before saying, Director He, I don't know who's deliberately messing with AI Meng, but it's always trending. Tell her I got it, Chin-mo said calmly as he drove. Like new wife number 1, hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Hit bar was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-25. Hee-hwan looked at Chin-mo and asked in a low voice, What do we do now? Chin-mo didn't say anything. After a while he said softly, You don't like a female star very much. If it's revealed that she gave birth out of wedlock, do you think this news will overshadow AI Meng? Hee-hwan thought about it and knew who the female celebrity was. She was the most popular female celebrity in King Entertainment. She was someone who dominated the trending searches all year round. Even a piece of clothing or a bag would be on the trending searches, let alone a topic like having a child out of wedlock. It was a good thing that it wasn't exposed on Weibo. But Hee-hwan still looked at Chin-mo suspiciously. Won't there be negative repercussions? Chin-mo was focused on driving and smiled. I forgot to tell you she's getting married. Hee-hwan let out another, "Aw." Chin-mo continued, the man's family is rich. In fact, they've been married for 3 years. This time they're just making it public. Her contract hasn't arrived yet, so I can use this as a favor. It's not a big deal to be on the hot search list. Let Secretary He handle this. When Twin is released, she can attend with her rich husband. That would be the breaking point that would push Twin to its peak. That would depend on the quality of the movie. With Chin-mo in charge, he still had some confidence. But for AI Meng to appear as the second female lead, it definitely wouldn't work. He was a businessman, but he wasn't omnipotent. And he had to abide by some rules. After he finished speaking, Hee-hwan looked at him with a strange expression. Chin-mo, I think you're very suited to be an unscrupulous businessman. Chin-mo looked at her with an amused expression. That's an unscrupulous businessman. Hee-hwan, you probably haven't seen a real unscrupulous businessman. Her face was full of curiosity. Chin-mo smiled. The Yi brothers are the real unscrupulous businessmen. Hee-hwan stared at him. Then why do you still want Hee-hwan to marry an unscrupulous businessman? Chin-mo chuckled softly, then said in a low voice, Yi Xiangnan will definitely inherit Stars Entertainment in the future. When that time comes, Stars Entertainment and King Entertainment can form a super entity. Our Hee-hwan won't have to be a profiteer anymore. President Chin admitted that he was lying to his wife. King Entertainment wouldn't be affiliated to Stars Entertainment, neither would Stars Entertainment. Hence, Hee-hwan was still the rightful heir. Half of what he said was to make Hee-hwan happy, and the other half was to comfort her. In the future, Hee-hwan would definitely feel heartache for Hee-hwan's future. However, his wife was no pushover either. She immediately said, in that case, Hee-hwan doesn't have to work so hard anymore. She can grow up peacefully. Chin-mo's fingers gently touched her hair and he smiled faintly, but if the two of them don't connect, then Hee-hwan will have to learn again. How old do I have to work? Hee-hwan glanced at him with a pitiful expression. Chin-mo reached out and pinched her little face. His voice was low and hoarse. So cruel. You should be able to work until you're 60, right? She still asked pitifully. She still felt sorry for Yi-Hwan. Chin-emo parked the car by the side of the road and turned to look at her. But I'm 60 and Yi-Hwan isn't even 30 yet. She still has to take over. There's no other way. As he said that, Yi-Hwan interpreted another meaning. Chin-emo, have you always planned to let Yi-Hwan take over the company? Like new wife number 1. Husband addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Play bar updates the fastest. Chapter 45-26. Chin-emo tilted his head and looked at Yi-Hwan. After a long while he smiled faintly but did not say anything. He merely stroked her little head. Yi-Hwan was a little disappointed. She lowered her eyes and did not speak for a long while. Chin-emo saw that the traffic light had turned green and started the car again. He sighed softly. Letting her grow up by our side and studying abroad at the age of 18 was the biggest concession I could make. Yi-Hwan, none of the heirs of the Chin family left home after the age of 10. Yi-Hwan was upset. She turned her face to the side and said softly after a long while, Chin-emo, I know. I just can't accept it. She had been very free since she was young, so it was hard for her to imagine the life Yi-Hwan would have to face in the future. Would she be like Chin-emo, restricted in many things and unable to do as she pleased? As Yi-Hwan thought about it, she suddenly asked in a low voice, Chin-emo, are you unhappy? Chin-emo did not reply. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and snorted softly. Sometimes. He paused for a while before continuing. The most unhappy time is when I know you like someone else. He had magnanimously gone to look for Rong-yu because he loved Yi-Hwan, so he had forgiven her. Yi-Hwan was stunned by President Chin's awkward performance. After a long while she came back to her senses and snorted. Stop it. You're like a thief crying thief. Chin-emo smiled faintly and did not say anything else. What he did not tell her was that he would never be unhappy with her by his side. After driving for about an hour, they arrived at Rong-yu's apartment. Of course, the atmosphere was a little gloomy, mainly because AI Meng-Meng had been affected by the trending topic. She had been tagged once again even though she had left the industry. Rong-yu opened the door and smiled faintly. President Chin. His gaze swept across Yi-Hwan's face. Yi-Hwan. AI Meng-Meng poured tea for them. No matter how spoiled Yi-Hwan was, she was still a woman. She could see that AI Meng-Meng was very sad. Even though she had hurt Yi-Hwan more or less, to Yi-Hwan some things were innocent. She couldn't relate it to AI Meng-Meng and think badly of her. Moreover, she was now Rong-yu's wife. Rong-yu had always been indifferent, but he would always be affected. He could only force himself to stay alert. Yi-Hwan was a little worried. Originally she was worried about whether Twin would be screened, but now she was more worried about Rong-yu and AI Meng-Meng. If Twin was finished, AI Meng-Meng's life would also be over. This kind of mental blow would be nailed to the pillar of shame for the rest of her life. He could not escape it. Yi-Hwan looked at Chin-emo. Men were more direct. Chin-emo asked Rong-yu for the script, and the two men entered the study together. It looked very harmonious. Yi-Hwan and AI Meng-Meng were left alone in the living room. The atmosphere was a little strange. AI Meng-Meng's eyes were slightly red. Director He, I'm sorry to have caused you trouble. The trouble isn't you, Yi-Hwan said lightly. Then she looked at AI Meng-Meng. You should know who it is. Why don't you say it? Her tone was gentle, but it gave AI Meng-Meng a lot of pressure. She did not dare to say it because she cherished her relationship with Rong-yu. She was afraid that if she said it, the only happiness she had would be taken away. So she was very careful. Chapter 45-27. Actually, Yi-Hwan did not expect AI Meng-Meng to say it, she was just saying it casually. If AI Meng-Meng wanted to say it, she would have done so long ago. She did not want to force her. After that they did not talk much and just drank their tea. The men were the ones who did the rest. Chin-emo spent the whole afternoon and decided to shoot a short documentary. It was about 5 minutes long and AI Meng-Meng would act in it. Actually, it was not, it was just a reenactment of the experience. Chin-emo walked out with the script in his hand. He stood in the living room and paused for a moment before saying, "Pack up, we will go to the border tonight." Yi-Hwan looked at him. Chin-emo smiled faintly. That is AI Meng-Meng's hometown. We will shoot there, and when we return to B City, We just need to add a few scenes. This is a narrative and the best way to clear her name. Moreover, AI Meng Meng only has this one chance. He Huan looked at him, surprised and understanding at the same time. She almost felt a lump in her throat. Actually, Chinamo did things that he usually disdained for her. Suddenly, she felt a little touched and an indescribable feeling welled up in her heart. She wanted to express something to him, but there was someone else around. He Huan could only suppress her thoughts and look at him. And Chinamo could guess what she was thinking. He looked at her quietly for a while and smiled. He Huan's face suddenly turned red. Chinamo turned his head. Let's go back and pack up. We will meet at the airport at 8. With that, he was about to leave with He Huan when Rong Yu called out to him. President Qin. Chinamo turned back. Rong Yu's voice was a little hoarse. Thank you. Chinamo said faintly, you're welcome. The conditions there are a little tough. Bring some medicine or something. With that, he left with He Huan. After getting into the car, just as Chinamo was about to start the engine, He Huan held his arm and said softly, Chinamo, thank you. What's wrong? Chinamo smiled. They are thanking me one by one. He Huan continued to look at him without saying a word. Chinamo pinched her cheeks. He Huan, don't forget that I'm your husband. It's only right for me to do anything for you. Isn't that what a married couple is supposed to do? He Huan was a little dazed. After a long time, she leaned over and pressed her face against his arm. Chinamo lowered his head and looked at her tenderly. Just like that, they spent about 10 minutes alone before Chinamo started the car. When he parked his car downstairs, it was already 6 o'clock in the afternoon and the sky was getting dark. After returning home, they had a simple meal. Then Chinamo made arrangements and asked He Huan to pack her luggage. This was the first time He Huan had helped Chinamo pack his luggage. She opened his closet and took out 2 sets of clothes and a jacket. She did the same for herself. Chinamo said while talking on the phone, I only have a jacket. I can't fit it in my suitcase. Plus, I'll be back in a few days. Oh, He Huan replied and took out his jacket. Chinamo continued to make phone calls while preparing the medicine and some other things. He Huan looked at him and felt that he was a little idiot. After hanging up, Chinamo passed the phone to He Huan and squatted down to close his suitcase. Standing up, he looked at He Huan and sighed softly. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to adapt there. It's a tough environment even though it's only for 5 days. Chapter 45-28. Chinamo looked at her and gently ruffled her hair. His voice was even lower. It's mainly because you're not feeling well now. I wouldn't have worried if it was before. He Huan shook her head. I'm much better now. But she coughed after saying that. Chinamo looked at her. You think you're fine? Look at how delicate you are. I'm not. He Huan pursed her lips and looked at him. Chinamo took the scarf and gloves from the side and helped her put them on one by one. It was very tight. It was 6:40 p.m. when they set off. Chinamo drove to the airport. In the car, He Huan asked him, can we rent the equipment locally? It would take too long to transport it by car. The journey would take about 2 days and they wouldn't be able to make it in time. She was afraid that they wouldn't be able to rent it locally. Chinamo held the steering wheel and said calmly, don't worry, the equipment will be sent on a private plane. King Entertainment's best team will be there too. We're just short of a director. Of course, he would also bring the editing equipment so that he could work while He Huan was filming. The environment might not be good, but it would only be for a few days. He would be fine once he got through this. Chinmo's car stopped at the airport. He held He Huan's fingers and got out of the car. Take the bag, I'll take the luggage. He Huan nodded and took a big bag. It was all for work and she didn't have many daily necessities. Before boarding the plane, Chinmo received a call. He Huan was waiting for him at the boarding gate. She saw that his expression was a little serious, so she asked him softly, what's wrong, Chinmo? Chinmo's voice was a little low. AIGA's new film is scheduled for 214. And it's a commercial film. He was the CEO of King Entertainment. Of course, he knew about the movie, but the female lead wasn't AIGA. But now, Chinmo said, got it. Then he looked at He Huan. He knew she heard it, so he just smiled and said, let's go. He Huan caught up with him and asked softly, she did it on purpose, didn't she? She was the one who caused AI Meng Meng to be on the hot search list, right? Qin Mo stared at her for a long while before smiling. That's not important. He Huan immediately asked him, then what's important? The most important thing is to do your own thing. Qin Mo held her hand tightly. Rong Yu and Ai Mingming also came over. Rong Yu's expression was very bad while Ai Mingming looked worried. Rong Yu, I can go by myself. You don't have to follow me. Qin Mo walked over and looked at the time. Let's go together. It's getting late. Ai Mingming wanted to say something but stopped. Rong Yu tightened his grip on her hand and said in a low voice, let's go. People will be suspicious if I stay. This was not just a reshoot but also a trade secret. In the end, the group boarded the private plane together. Soon, the private plane took off and headed for a certain border area. The private plane stopped at the airport and then a helicopter flew in. The place was very secluded. When the helicopter landed, He Huan looked around and couldn't believe there was such a place. That small house was a hotel. He Huan looked at Qin Mo. Qin Mo shrugged and said, it's a hotel. Poor director, he had filmed mostly urban art films in the past and the locations were not bad. He had never been to a place like this. Chapter 45-29. She looked at him in a daze. Qin Mo chuckled softly. If you're afraid of bugs, you can sleep on me. I'm not afraid. He Huan snorted and checked in with Qin Mo. There were about 7 or 8 people in the group and Qin Mo was the leader. It was already past 10 at night. He gave them the room cards and said, it's getting late. Everyone should rest early and wake up at 6 tomorrow morning. This schedule was a little strict but there was no other way. Time was tight. Qin Mo took the room card, dragged his suitcase and brought one of his family's dogs to their own room. It was already the best but it was still very simple. It was unbelievably simple. He Huan was stunned when she entered the room. She had never stayed in a room like this. There was a big white bed made of wood, the kind that would fall apart if not handled carefully. The curtains were half fallen and covered in dust. The floor looked like it had been bitten by rats. He Huan looked at it eagerly and tilted her head to look at Qin Mo. Qin Mo smiled. I've stayed in worse places. It's not that easy to be an heir. He Huan was still eager. Will Yi Huan have to live like this in the future? It was really hard for her to imagine that Yi Huan, who was like a little princess, would one day live in a worse place. She was stunned for a moment. Qin Mo smiled. Girls don't need it. He just needs to be a female CEO. He ruffled her hair. Actually, if you want her to be more relaxed, there's another way, which is... He paused and He Huan looked at him. What is it? A playmate. Qin Mo's voice sounded like he was sighing. Or rather, a spare tire for Yi Xiangnan. If Yi Huan and Yi Xiangnan don't like each other in the future, this is the only way if you don't want Yi Huan to work so hard. He Huan looked at her husband and felt as if her worldview had been shattered. What's the difference between this and a child bride? Of course there is a difference. Qin Mo's voice carried a touch of indifference. The other party's family background is not bad. She was at least the child of a family with a net worth of over 100 million. However, compared to King Entertainment's net worth of hundreds of billions, it was still a far cry. By saying this, Qin Mo had already found a suitable candidate. He was just short of bringing her home. If Yi Huan had been brought up in the Yi family, then this candidate was unnecessary and could not exist. Yi Huan stared at him with her eyes wide open in disbelief. Qin Mo's fingers gently stroked her face. I have chosen the candidate. She is 4 years older than Yi Huan and the same age as Yi Xiangnan. Those with top-notch aptitude would naturally have top-notch looks as well. Yi Huan cupped her face and said in confusion, Qin Mo, how can you do that? Why not? Qin Mo turned on the air conditioner and took off his coat. His voice was almost cruel. This kind of thing is actually not uncommon in rich families. Yi Huan's voice was a little weak. But this is not good. There's nothing bad about it. He will become the vice president of King Entertainment at the age of 25. If he can't do it, he will be abandoned. Qin Mo's voice was cold. Of course, all these years of hard work. Before he could say anything, Yi Huan said, Qin Mo, don't say any more. It's too cruel. This is the game of rich families. You have to abide by it. Qin Mo smiled faintly. Yi Huan was stunned for a while before she said in a low voice, will Yi Huan agree? She won't know, Qin Mo said lightly. Chapter 45:30. Chin Mo pinched her little face and said in a low voice, "When we are done with this, I will bring the child to you when we return to B City. You will like her." Then he said gently, "Go take a shower." But He Huan didn't want to. "What's the use of me liking her? I want Yi Huan to like her." Chin Mo carried her up. "Take a shower and go to bed early. We will talk about this tomorrow." But when he carried her into the bathroom, he realized that it wasn't a bathroom at all. There was only a hole in the bathroom. And it wasn't a very clean hole. Not only He Huan but even Chin Mo was stunned. The two of them were stunned for a long time before He Huan twisted her neck. "Chin Mo, are you sure you've stayed in a worse room?" The definition of worse was that there wasn't even a hole in the room. Chin Mo was also speechless. He sighed and said, "I'll go ask if there are any better rooms." He Huan's voice was like a little lamb. "You have already asked for the best room. Have you forgotten?" Even Chin Mo was speechless. After a while he said in a low voice, "So that's it." He carried her back to the bedroom and thought for a while. "I will go down and get 2 thermos bottles and a basin. I have to wash it." He Huan blushed when he said that. Then she looked at Chin Mo. He smiled and went downstairs. When he left, he also took away the only luxurious smell in the room. He Huan also noticed that the white bedsheet was actually beige with a strange color on it. To be honest, she would never be able to lie down on it. Moreover, she had bounced up as if she had been bouncing up. Then He Huan stared at a black cockroach on the bed with an indescribable fear in her eyes. Before she could regain her senses, she screamed. Chin Mo came up in about half a minute. When he opened the door, he saw He Huan crawling on a broken chair and staring at the big bed. On the bed there was a black cockroach. Chin Mo smiled and walked over to brush off the cockroach. He then opened the window and threw it out. As soon as he opened the window, He Huan felt cold. Although this was Yunnan, it was still very cold and humid. As soon as the window was opened, there seemed to be a lot of mist drifting in. He Huan felt a little cold. Chin Mo immediately closed the window, turned around and pulled her into his embrace. He reached out and patted her head. "You're timid and afraid of the cold. I really shouldn't have brought you here. How can we film it if we don't bring it? Do you know how to do it?" He Huan complained in a low voice. Chin Mo's eyes lit up. He kissed her cheek and said meaningfully, "I know a lot. I've told you before, Mrs. Chin." He Huan said pitifully, "I don't believe you will." Chin Mo smiled and carried her into the bathroom. Although it was painful to face the big hole, He Huan had no choice but to brush her teeth and wash up in the bathroom. After washing up, she went back to the bedroom and stood there, not knowing where to sleep tonight. Chin Mo soaked his feet and turned around. He looked at He Huan and said, "I'll put my coat on the bed. I'm sure you won't be used to it." As he said that, he pinched her cheek and said in a low voice, "Don't be so sentimental." He took the coat from the luggage and laid it on the bed carefully. Then he looked at her and said, "Come here." He Huan was anxious. She had already changed into her pajamas. She crawled over and lay down carefully. His clothes smelled good and made her feel at ease. Chapter 45:31. She lay on top of the coat. Chin Mo looked at it and actually felt a little disgusted, so he lay down with his clothes on. After lying down, he still smelled an unpleasant smell which made him want to die. He Huan raised her eyes and looked at him pitifully. "You seem to have a stinky face. I thought you were used to it." Chin Mo couldn't stand it. He reached out and patted the back of her head. "That was 20 years ago." He Huan smiled mischievously. Then she moved her little head into his arms like a little animal, soft and obedient. Just when he thought she would say something soft, He Huan's voice was soft and seductive. "So, you've been living a luxurious life all these years, haven't you?" Huan Huan. It was rare for him to call her like this, but every time he called her like this, it meant that he was exercising his rights as an older brother. When He Huan was young, she had to call him older brother. However, this older brother of hers had been unkind since she was young and had strong intentions towards her. Now that he called her like this, she was dumbfounded. She looked at him pitifully, not knowing what he was going to do to her. Chin Mo reached out and pinched her face. "Your skin is itching again, isn't it?" As he said that, he used a little force. Poor He Huan's face was distorted and she looked at him pitifully. Chin Mo smiled. "Call me older brother and I'll let you go, you heartless little thing." He Huan cried out in pain. He was too despicable. She frowned and glared at him. Call me and I'll let you go. Under such terrible conditions he could still joke with her and felt relaxed. He Huan's eyes were full of tears. She was bullied by him. She didn't want to give in, but it was really too painful. She could only call him older brother with tears in her eyes. Qin Mo smiled in satisfaction and let her go. Then he swept her into his arms and moved towards his coat. He Huan also moved with him and then said in a low voice, "You're so scheming." He still smiled and lowered his head to kiss her face. "Let's sleep." As he said that, he pulled the quilt over and covered himself with it. He Huan was also quite speechless. She could only bury her little face into his chest. Rong Yu and Ai Mengmeng were also doomed to have a sleepless night. Ai Mengmeng had grown up here since she was young. In fact, she could still tolerate it because the house she used to live in was even worse than this. However, Rong Yu was not used to it. Although he was not born rich, such conditions were unexpectedly simple for him. Ai Mengmeng was hurt by his expression. She said in a low voice, "Rong Yu, do you think this place is bad?" Rong Yu looked at her and sighed softly. Then he patted her little head. "It's nothing." His health was not very good and he was in such an environment. It was indeed difficult for him, but it was also for Ai Mengmeng. A good man should do anything for a woman. But even so, he still couldn't fall asleep at night. He tossed and turned restlessly. In the morning, Rong Yu had a slight fever. However, he knew it and pretended that nothing was wrong. He took his medicine and got out of bed. Everyone gathered at the bus downstairs. Breakfast was biscuits and bread because they really couldn't eat the food here. The collection location was Ai Mingming's hometown. The bus drove into the difficult mountain road and stopped 2 hours later. He Huan almost threw up in the car. Chapter 45-32. Qin looked at her pale face and was a little worried. He called Secretary He when he got out of the car. He Huan asked him what it was, but he just smiled and didn't tell her. So secretive. He Huan looked at him and snorted. Qin smiled. "It's a good thing." He Huan muttered and ran away. She wore a black coat today and her hair was tied up. She looked healthier because of her work and her face was rosy. She ran around and arranged work while Qin stood where he was and looked at her quietly. At this moment she was the happiest. He Huan was at work. He Huan finished her work and turned to see Qin standing there quietly looking at her. She went over and asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Qin eyes darkened as though he was hiding a lot of emotions in them. However, this only lasted for a moment. He quickly returned to normal and reached out to gently rub her hair. He lowered his voice and said, "No, I just think you're pretty good the way you are." He Huan's expression was a little strange, as if she was looking at an idiot. It was also Qin first time being treated like this. He smiled and said, "Okay, get ready." He Huan looked at him again and went to find Ai Mengmeng. Ai Mengmeng was putting on makeup. Actually, she had only changed into clothes that were a little more difficult to wear. Her hair was natural and it looked like she was still living in the mountains. Rong Yu was right beside her. Looking at her plain appearance, his breathing was gentle, as if he didn't dare to wake up from a dream. It was as if he was afraid that if he blinked, it would become a dream. He was afraid that she would still be here, and when he woke up he would be in an apartment in B City. Ai Mengmeng was done with makeup and looked up at Rong Yu quietly. She looked a little uneasy. She belonged here. Everything in B City was like a dream and Rong Yu was also a dream to her. Now that he saw her like this, would he still want her? Her eyes were very uneasy. Rong Yu was very meticulous and he smiled at her. "You look good like this." "Really?" Ai Mengmeng asked carefully. Rong Yu didn't say anything more. He just tugged at her hair and started filming. He Huan was in charge of the filming personally, and Ai Mengmeng's acting was also very good. While He Huan was working, Qin chose to edit films on the big bar cart. After a busy day, he had a simple lunch. Originally, he thought that he would get the same treatment as last night. However, when he saw the hotel, he realized that something was wrong. It was as if the hotel had been completely renovated. Although it was simple, it was very clean. He Huan walked slowly and turned to look at Qin. "How did you do it?" It should be known that this kind of operation was very easy in B City, but it was still very difficult in such a remote place. He Huan looked at Qin and Qin smiled. "It's airlifted. It's not hard." He said it casually, but Huan was still very touched. Her little nose was red and her eyes were watery as she looked at him. Silly. He smiled and reached out to gently rub her hair. Then he pulled her in. Behind them, Ai Mengmeng was also amazed and felt that it was unbelievable. Rongyu reminded her, "You have to keep your chin back." Chapter 45-33. Rongyu reminded her, "You need to retract your chin." "Oh," she replied and looked at him. "Xiao-Qin, you're amazing." Rongyu smiled. "The power of money." Ai Mengmeng bit her lip. "But I think you're better." She looked at him after saying that. Rongyu smiled warmly. "Really?" Ai Mengmeng nodded hard. "Really?" Rongyu rubbed his chin with his hand and chuckled. "Why do I feel like you look a little silly?" Ai Mengmeng was stunned. After a long while she said in a low voice, "Do you hate me when I look silly?" Rongyu was speechless for a long time. Then he smiled. "You're really silly, like a pig's brain." Ai Mengmeng was even more confused. She was indeed silly. However, when she returned to the room, the renovated place made her feel more relaxed. There was even a bathtub. It was a little extravagant to just work for a few days. Ai Mengmeng felt a little uneasy. After all, she had been taken care of. Compared to her uneasiness, Rongyu was much calmer. He said calmly, "President Qin prepared it for Huan. It's just convenient for us, so don't feel pressured. Just accept it. The entire crew will be treated the same." Ai Mengmeng calmed down a little. However, there were still differences in the renovations. Within a day, Huan and Qin Mo's room had been changed to a pink one. Even the bathtub was pink. Huan was a little speechless. Qin Mo. Qin Mo smiled. "What's wrong?" Huan walked in and looked around. She turned around and said, "It's all pink." "Qin Mo, are you a little crazy?" Qin Mo chuckled. "What's wrong?" Huan bit her lip. "I mean, you're a man. In a place like this, we're staying here for a few days. Do you think I would allow this if we were staying here?" He went over and hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Huan was still a little speechless. "I might not like it. But I like it." Qin Mo smiled. "There won't be a chance like this in the future. I don't want such an opportunity." Huan snorted and went to the bathroom. She couldn't wait to take a bath. He was too dirty. She thought that the pink Qin Mo wouldn't want to hit on her, but she really underestimated Qin Mo's moral integrity. Fortunately, after a tiring day, she could still take a bath, although he had taken advantage of her. Huan was even more tired now. She lay down on the soft bed and rubbed her belly. "Qin Mo, can you conjure up something to eat? I'm so hungry." He smiled and made a phone call. After a while, 2 servings of crispy chicken rice arrived. Although it wasn't a big meal, it was a big meal for people who had been eating bread for the whole day. Huan enjoyed the food and smiled at Qin Mo. "Qin Mo, you're so good." Qin Mo smiled calmly and said, "You didn't say that I was good in the bathtub just now. You kept saying that I was bad and hateful." When he said that, his eyes were very clear. Huan's face was completely red. He was too shameless. And at this time, the shameless man even leaned over and whispered naughtily against her earlobe, "Then tell me, am I good or bad?" Huan couldn't utter a single word under that kind of gaze. Chapter 45-34. Huan was dumbfounded. She tilted her head and looked at Qin Mo. After a long while she said with difficulty, "You're so shameless." "Shameless again?" Qin Mo's voice was amused. "You've changed so quickly, huh?" Huan snorted and patted her stomach in satisfaction. Qin Mo looked at her as if he was looking at a little animal. Actually, she was raised by his family. Unbeknownst to her, the Qin family had already raised her as his wife. It was just that Huan didn't know about it. When she found out, she was frightened and ran away. Now she was finally back. He was back by his side. Qin Mo reached out and gently stroked her hair. He didn't say anything and just looked at her with that gaze. For some reason, Huan's heart started to beat faster. She looked at him for a long time without saying anything, and her little face blushed a little. Qin Mo smiled faintly and reached out to hold her in his arms. She leaned on his shoulder, feeling a little uneasy, but more than that, she was moved. She thought that she had always liked him, but they had missed each other for many years. At this moment He Huan didn't want to be calculative about the past. The woman he had used to anger him. Nothing else mattered because at this moment they were hugging each other. After a long while, just as Qin Mo was feeling a little emotional, he lowered his head to say something to her. But just as he lowered his head, he saw that He Huan had fallen asleep on his shoulder. He couldn't help but smile, but he couldn't help but look at her. Her fair little face was on his shoulder, and her long eyelashes were covered in a layer of shadow. She looked very cute. Qin Mo's heart was unbelievably soft. He kissed her and said in a very low voice, "Good night." Yi Huan felt a little ticklish from his kisses. She buried her face in his chest and murmured half awake, "Qin Mo, I'm sleepy. Stop kissing me. Aren't you tired of kissing me?" After saying that, she buried herself in his arms and continued to sleep. Qin Mo lowered his head to look at his little fellow. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. He lowered his head and kissed her again, then carefully placed her on the big bed. He still had some things to do. Time was too tight. He almost had no time to sleep. Late at night, Qin Mo sat alone at a simple desk, drinking a cup of coffee that didn't taste good while doing He Huan's work. When he finished his cup of coffee, he lowered his head and looked at it with a frown. Then he started to miss Qin Chen's hand-ground coffee. What was he drinking now? Although it tasted terrible, Qin Mo still poured himself another cup and drank it with patience. It wasn't until 1 o'clock at night that he was almost done. Qin Mo stretched and turned his head to look at He Huan. He Huan was sleeping soundly. She hugged the quilt and buried her face in the pillow. A strand of beautiful black hair peeked out from the pillow. Qin Mo went over, took off his sweater and lay down beside her in a shirt. The conditions were much better today and He Huan slept much more soundly. Although it was very late, Qin Mo couldn't bear to sleep when he saw her sleeping. He just lay there and watched her quietly. He Huan slept very soundly, but she could probably feel the warmth from his body. She gently leaned against him and finally directly leaned into his arms. Probably because it was comfortable, He Huan sighed and finally buried herself deeper in his arms. Type Panda Literature into the search engine and you will find this site. Thank you. Chapter 4531. War Between Us. Qin Mo, how are you? Chapter 4535. The expression on Qin Mo's face became much gentler. He kissed her and went to sleep with her. Just like that, filming at the border for about 4 days was completed ahead of schedule. He Huan watched as Qin Mo edited the last part. She had already seen the first part and was very impressed and amazed by President Qin. Qin Mo was really a genius. After wiping out all of AI Mingming's previous scenes, the sense of the story was not affected at all. Instead, it made the atmosphere a little more tense. When he added in the content from the past few days, it was not abrupt. Moreover, AI Mingming acted very well and was at the peak of her acting skills ever since she entered the industry. He Huan lay behind Qin Mo and bit her lip gently. She said softly, "Qin Mo, it feels perfect to reshoot the scenes when we return to the city." Qin Mo pulled her hand from his shoulder and smiled. "Hubby, am I awesome?" He Huan hummed in acknowledgement and said sincerely, "You're amazing." Qin Mo laughed. It was a deep and infectious laugh. He Huan's face was a little red. There were many people around, so she leaned closer and said in a very low voice, "It's Zero's awesome." This time he was even happier. He looked at her from the side, then took her little hand and pulled her in front of him. He let her sit by his leg and watched the film again. AI Mingming's documentary was placed at the end, so it would not affect the viewing. When they were done, Qin Mo lowered his head and asked softly, "It's all right, right?" "It's all right." He Huan's face was red as she said softly. There was a hint of admiration in her voice and expression. Qin Mo laughed softly again and packed his things. Tonight's private plane will return to the city at 2 o'clock. We will gather at Entertainment Studio 6 at 6 in the morning. Is everyone okay with that? After saying that, he looked at Rong Yu and said, "You don't have to go tomorrow. I'll get someone to pick AI Mingming up first thing in the morning." He knew that Rong Yu's health had always been poor, and he had probably been suffering for the past few days. He Huan looked at Qin Mo and felt a little touched. Qin Mo was actually very considerate, especially to people who had nothing to do with him. He knew that he was doing this for her. Of course, Qin Mo knew what she was thinking. He pursed his lips and smiled. He didn't say anything and just led He Huan to the car. Of course, the others were also picked up by a private car. Back to the city. It was already the 8th day of the new year. He Huan and Qin Emo hadn't seen Yi Huan for a few days. They originally wanted to bring Yi Huan back, but they had a lot of things to do so they put it on hold. When they returned to the apartment, He Huan fell asleep almost immediately. However, Qin Emo couldn't sleep. He had to deal with some matters in the entertainment industry. After all, he hadn't been in the company for a few days. After he was done, it was 3 in the evening again. They still had to stay up all night, but the coffee was a little better. Qin Emo rubbed his forehead. He was very sleepy, but he wanted to sit alone for a while. He lit a cigarette and stood in front of the French window looking out at the night sky. It was 3 in the morning and the sky was much lighter. He stood there alone, enjoying the rare moment of solitude. Yes, it was rare. Ever since He Huan returned to his side, Qin Emo had almost forgotten what it felt like to be alone. Now it felt good. In fact, he already knew that AIGA's new movie had already grossed more than 100 million, and Twin had yet to pass the screening. The situation was very unfavorable, especially if this movie couldn't make a comeback, then AI Ming Ming wouldn't be able to clear her name. Type Panda Literature into the search engine to find this site. Thank you. Chapter 4532. War Between Us. Qin Emo, how are you? Chapter 4536. Qin Emo was under a lot of pressure. He smoked quietly, his brows furrowed. It was possible to fake the box office, but if it was not a huge hit, everything would be for naught. Qin Emo stood there until 4 o'clock in the morning. Then he took a quick shower and lay down on the bed. As soon as he closed his eyes, he fell into a deep sleep and almost overslept. In the morning, He Huan was the first to wake up. She sat up with her messy hair. She looked down at Qin Emo and reached out to push him. It's time. Qin Emo opened his eyes. He had not woken up yet. He reached out to pull her into his arms and kissed her. Is it time? He Huan lay in his arms. Her face was a little red and her hair was messy. She said softly, it's time. Qin Emo, when did you sleep? Your eyes are a little red and there seem to be some fine lines. Although it was time, Qin Emo did not care too much. He lay on his arms in a relaxed manner. So, He Huan said pitifully, so I'm not that handsome anymore. So you think I'm handsome? The man smiled happily and reached out to pinch her little face. He Huan cried out. If you pinch me again, I definitely won't be handsome anymore. She reached out to slap his hand away and turned to run away. Although Qin Emo reached out to catch her, she still escaped. He Huan stuck her tongue out at him at the bathroom door. Qin Emo, you can get up now. He looked at her and smiled. Come here and let me kiss you again. It's too late. You arranged the time yourself. He Huan said like a little lamb. However, she still came over and kissed his lips. She half knelt in front of him and said in a low voice, all right, can you get up now? Qin Emo smiled and kissed her for a long time before letting her go. His voice was extremely hoarse. I'll make it up to you tonight. He Huan blushed a little and ran to the bathroom. Qin Emo noticed that her body seemed to be much better and her face was often ruddy. Maybe she could let Qin Chen see that they might be able to have another child. Qin Emo was in a much better mood. He got out of bed and went straight to the bathroom. He picked up He Huan, who was brushing her teeth, with one hand and brushed her teeth with the other. This series of actions made He Huan speechless. She could only let him hold her and brush her teeth. When she was done, she couldn't help but complain, Qin Emo, I'm already 32 years old. Qin Emo smiled. In my heart you are still a little girl. He Huan pursed her lips and glared at him. Really? Emo smiled and put her down. Don't you think so? He Huan stuck out her tongue and laughed. I don't think so. But after saying that, she felt that something was wrong. After a long time, she remembered that the way she spoke seemed to be something that only a little girl would do. He Huan bit her lips and didn't say anything for a long time. Qin Emo smiled and pinched her little face. Change your clothes. We'll have breakfast in the car. He Huan nodded. She thought about it and asked him, is the driver driving? Qin Emo replied naturally, I'm driving. He Huan bit her lips. You can't let the driver drive. You only slept for a few hours. Your eyes are still red. As she said that, she reached out to touch his eyes. Her expression was especially serious. And Qin Mo's heart warmed. He raised his hand and grabbed her hand. He Huan was shocked and wanted to move away, but he didn't let her. He held her hand and let her feel his warmth. Chapter 45-37. Qin Mo's heart warmed. He raised his hand and grabbed her hand. He Huan was startled and wanted to move her hand away, but Qin Mo didn't let her. He held her hand and let her feel his warmth. He Huan bit her lip, didn't move and didn't make a sound. She just looked at him. Qin Mo's eyes seemed to be dyed with a layer of darkness. He also looked at her quietly. Once he thought he got everything he wanted, but now he knew that there were more wonderful things in this world than getting what he wanted. There was a trace of emotion in his eyes. His warm palm was pressed against her and his voice was also low. He Huan. I guess you love me, don't you? He Huan simply couldn't digest what he had just said. She could only stare at him helplessly. He lowered his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Say something." He Huan felt that she had seen the world. At least He Huan accepted Qin Mo's confession several times. But now she was not calm at all. Her heart was beating fast because he was going to reciprocate. Not only like but also love. He Huan bit her lip and stammered, "It'll be too late. Should we go now?" "We can still go by helicopter so we..." Qin Mo raised his hand and looked at the time. "We have half an hour." Of course he lied to her. He Huan was the kind of person who would rather do something sooner than later. After hesitating for a moment she nodded. Probably because she was too nervous and shy, her eyes were watery as if she was bullied by him. But Qin Mo wasn't satisfied. He pinched her little nose and said, "You have to say it." He Huan suddenly got angry and said in a low voice, "I'm hungry and you still want to force me to confess? Qin Mo, you're almost 40, can you wake up a little?" Her look made him laugh and he reached out and touched her little face. "Hungry?" She still stared at him. "I'll let you try." He smiled, put his coat away and led her downstairs. They bought breakfast at a breakfast shop. Qin Mo parked his car by the roadside and He Huan got out of the car to buy breakfast. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait in line since it was early in the morning. Soon she came back with 2 sets of breakfast and handed one to Qin Mo. "Finish it before you leave." Qin Mo wanted to go immediately so he shook his head. "I'm not hungry." "Let's go." He Huan stopped him and said in a low voice, "Qin Mo, you don't need more time. Besides, aren't you President Qin? It doesn't matter if you're late." Her heart ached for him. All these years he had been working the hardest, sleeping the least and doing the most difficult things all for her. He Huan felt the need to discipline him. Well, she was Mrs. Qin so she had the right to discipline him so she tried to be fierce. She didn't know how other wives disciplined their husbands, but this was the only way she could think of. Qin Mo looked at her with a strange look and said in a low voice, "You're disciplining me?" "Yes." Mrs. Qin's voice was obviously bluffing. And her appearance in his eyes was extremely cute. He smiled and reached out to stroke her hair. "Pretty good in the future, you have to maintain it." He Huan blushed. In fact, she didn't know why she was blushing. However, under his gaze she was a little embarrassed. Maybe this was the feeling of falling in love. Chapter 45-38. When they arrived at Studio 6, they busied themselves for the entire morning. By noon they were almost done. He Huan was very satisfied. She handed the film to Qin Mo, then looked at him and said, "It's already the 5th today. There are still 9 days left. Qin Mo, will we fail miserably?" "I don't know if we will fail miserably, but if we don't do anything we will definitely fail miserably." He smiled and carelessly reached out to stroke her hair. "So after lunch I'll edit the last bit and send it for approval. Anyway, it's in B City. There shouldn't be any problems after the approval today. After that we can release it again. We won't change it. We'll release it on 214. What do you think?" He Huan asked worriedly, "Will we make it in time? The film will take 2 hours. Even if you send it at 3 we might not make it in time." Qin Mo looked at his little wife and smiled. "Silly." He reached out to stroke her hair again. "How can there be such a silly little girl like you?" As she said that, He Huan bit her lip. "I'm telling the truth." Qin Mo smiled again. "They can work overtime." He Huan let out a cry, her expression and gaze a little dazed. After a long time she muttered softly, "Your identity seems to be very useful sometimes." He just realized. He laughed softly, his voice very pleasant. He Huan glanced at him, turned around and ran off. "Let's go eat." Qin Mo followed behind her. After a while he grabbed her hand and dragged her to his side. He Huan turned her head. Qin Mo smiled slightly. "Take my car." They ate at a restaurant with a good environment. However, Qin Mo had too many things to do, so he only stayed for half an hour before returning to King Entertainment to settle the final matters. After that, Qin Mo personally made a call. After communicating with the other party, he hung up. He Huan looked at him. "It's done." Qin Mo looked at He Huan and thought for a moment. "I'll get the driver to send you back. Wait for me at home, okay?" He Huan nodded. "Sure." Qin Mo smiled and called Secretary He over to arrange a car for him. He was about to leave when He Huan stopped him. "I'll go with you." He looked at her. "I'll see you out. I'll ask the driver to take me home and wait for you there." He Huan's tone was gentle, but there was also a hint of dominance in it. "You're very tired. Don't drive." Qin Mo stared at her and said in a low voice, "Is this Mrs. Qin's way of disciplining Mr. Qin?" He Huan snorted. "Whatever you say." Qin Mo smiled and didn't object. They went downstairs and got into the black limousine. Qin Mo told them the address and leaned back in the seat. He closed his eyes and said, "I'm going to sleep for a while." "Oh," He Huan replied. Just as she was about to say something, he had already reached out to hold her hand and said in a low voice, "Don't move. Just stay with me for a while." He Huan's face turned red and she didn't say anything for a long time. She probably felt his emotions, so she carefully leaned her little head on his shoulder. Qin Mo's eyes opened a slit and he looked at her before closing his eyes again. He reached out and swept her into his arms. His throat was extremely hoarse as he said, "Let me sleep for a while. Don't mess around." He Huan's voice became soft and low. "I'm not messing around. I'm a good girl." Qin Mo closed his eyes and smiled. His smile was mature and charming. It was the unique smile of a man of his age. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to spoiling. My phone is the fastest to update. Chapter 45-39. Qin Mo closed his eyes and smiled. His smile was mature and charming, which was unique to men of his age. He Huan was also tired. She leaned on his shoulder and closed her eyes. "I'm going to sleep for a while too. I'm so tired, Chino." She fell asleep quickly while Qin Mo was only a light sleeper. He lowered his head and looked at her with a gentle gaze. The car drove steadily until they reached the place for the trial. He Huan was still asleep. Qin Mo looked down at her for a while before telling the driver, "Wake her up when we reach the apartment and send her to the door." He was afraid that He Huan wouldn't be able to enter the apartment because she was too sleepy. The driver nodded. "Hey, President Qin. I'll come and wait for you after I'm done." Qin Mo didn't say anything. He opened the car door and closed it quickly. He didn't look at He Huan again, afraid that she would catch a cold. She hadn't been feeling well for the past few days. The driver waited for him to get out of the car and left. After they left, the driver looked at He Huan's sleeping face in the rearview mirror and turned up the air conditioner in the car a little. He Huan changed her position and continued to sleep. She woke up about an hour later. She opened her eyes and looked around. The driver turned around. "We're here. President Qin said that he won't be worried until I send you upstairs." He Huan snorted. "I'm a grown-up and not a kid anymore. Uncle Zhao, you go first." She put on her coat and opened the door to get out. Mr. Zhao didn't leave, nor did he follow her. He felt a little annoyed. He had watched Qin Mo and He Huan grow up together. He was happy to see them like this. However, he also noticed that He Huan's keys were left in the car. He just sat there and waited. He even took a sip of hot tea. As expected, He Huan ran down after a while. Her face was a little red. "Uncle Zhao." Mr. Zhao opened the car door. "What happened?" He Huan got into the back seat. "Where are my keys? I might have dropped them in the car." She looked for them for a long time but couldn't find them. She was a little anxious. She couldn't disturb Qin Mo now. Did she have to sleep somewhere else? He Huan thought about it and wanted to grab her hair. At this moment, a bunch of keys appeared in front of her and she waved it. Is this it? Huan bit her lower lip. Yeah. He was pleasantly surprised. But after a while he realized that he had been tricked. He cried out twice and ran away. After a while he turned back and said, Uncle Zhao, you are too bad. You are as bad as Chinemo. Old Zhao smiled and looked at Hyun's back. Then he sighed softly. He had been waiting for this day. It wasn't easy. These two little ones had been fighting for many years and they had finally reconciled. It was really good to watch. After old Zhao sighed, he chuckled again. Yeah, that's great. On the other hand, Huan returned to her apartment. The moment she opened the door, she felt very sleepy and tired. Her body felt like it had been overdrawn and she could not describe the feeling. She didn't do anything. She just wanted to lie down and she really did. Lying on their big bed, she felt that she could sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. When she woke up, night had already fallen. Huan woke up and looked at the neon lights outside the window. For a moment she couldn't come back to her senses. She couldn't tell where she was or what time it was. In fact, she didn't even know how she and Chinemo were doing. It took her about 10 seconds to sort it out. When she woke up, she thought about how they had separated in the afternoon and couldn't help but smile. Like new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-40. Just the thought of it made her smile. Huan suddenly missed Chinemo very much. She grabbed her phone and saw that it was already 8 o'clock. Even if he worked overtime, it wouldn't be late. She wanted to call him, but she decided against it. She still wanted to ask, so she dialed old Zhao's number. Old Zhao told her that Chinemo was socializing with a bunch of old guys and might not be free. He might also come back very late. Huan replied with an "oh" and hung up. He could understand. It wouldn't be right if she didn't socialize with someone who let him in through the back door. Thus she thought about it and decided to cook something herself. Her cooking skills were neither good nor bad. Living alone, she always had a little skill. And Huan's little skill was cooking instant noodles. Just as Huan was thinking about which flavor to cook, Chinemo called. He called from outside the private room. He had drunk some wine, so his handsome face was steaming. Huan answered his call and swiftly put the pancake in the boiling water. She was very swift and had done it thousands of times. Chinmo's voice was low and hoarse. You're awake. Huan was busy cooking noodles. Her phone was clipped to her ear. She smiled and said sweetly, Chinemo, how did you know I was cooking noodles? Chinemo leaned against the aisle and said in a low voice, why don't I know what you're like? Other than instant noodles, what else can you make? You're looking down on me. Huan's voice was so sweet that it seemed like honey was dripping out. Chinemo smiled and said in a low voice, aren't you going to ask me about the results? I believe you, she said sweetly. Chinemo smiled again. Why? Because you're Chinemo. Huan was like a little lamb, dragging out her voice to please him. Chinmo's heart skipped a beat. In fact, over the years there were too many people who flattered him. He had already grown impatient to listen to flattering words, but now that Huan said it, he was in a particularly good mood. Perhaps it was because she was Huan. Not because of anyone else, but because she was Huan. Chinmo's Adam's apple moved slightly and his voice became even lower. You're getting better at saying nice things. Huan put away the noodles and said, then come back early. I'll cook noodles for you and I'll say nicer things to you. After she finished speaking, Chinemo chuckled again. After laughing for a while, he said softly with a hint of teasing, I'm waiting for your instant noodles to taste how delicious it is. Huan felt that he was hateful. She stuck out her tongue and said, then you should come back soon. Chinemo didn't want to go back to the private room to eat with those old men, but his natural restraint made him end the call. When he was about to go back to the private room, he saw Ai Jia standing on the other side of the aisle. Chinmo's eyes darkened. He didn't want to say hello and wanted to go straight into the private room. At this moment he still felt that those old men were more adorable. Ai Jia's voice was a little fragile. Chinemo, don't you even need to say hello to me? Chinemo froze. After a long time he turned his head and looked at her quietly. Why did you come back? Chinemo, I also have my freedom, don't I? Ai Jia's face was still fragile and she looked like a white lotus. Like new wife number 1. Husband addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Husband addicted to spoiling. My mobile phone updates are the fastest. Chapter 45-41. At this moment he still felt that those old men were more adorable. Aijia's voice carried a touch of vulnerability. Chinemo, don't you even need to say hello to me? Chinmo's body froze. After a long time he tilted his head and looked at her quietly. Why did you come back? Chinemo, I also have my freedom, don't I? Aijia's face was still fragile. She looked like a white lotus. Chinemo smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He watched her walk over slowly and stood up straight. Anyway, they had already touched. Aijia kept walking to him and looked up at him slightly. Weren't you so cold before? You weren't so scheming before. Unable to leave, Chinemo simply lit a cigarette. Aijia immediately coughed. Chinemo stared at her and didn't put out the cigarette in his hand. When a man was heartless, he was really heartless. Aijia's face was a little painful. I just want to ask you for a favor. Chinemo continued to stare at her, his expression calm and collected. Aijia licked her lower lip and said with some difficulty, I want to marry Qin Lu. As soon as she finished speaking, Chinemo threw the cigarette butt on the ground and stamped it out. Then he looked at her as if she was crazy. Aijia, you're crazy. Qin Lu is gone. Your parents don't know, do they? She smiled softly. Her smile was strange, with a touch of childishness that made people's hair stand on end. This was the peak of Aijia's acting skills. Even 10 AI Mengmeng wouldn't be her match. Chinemo knew her well. He was not easy to deal with. He said in a low voice, You're threatening me. No, it's a request. Aijia could still be gentle under his intense gaze. He was definitely a powerful character. Of course, Chinemo didn't buy it. He just threw a few words at her. Stop dreaming. Really? Aijia smiled softly. It seems that you're not on my side in this matter. Chinemo chose to leave directly. After entering the box, he was not in a good mood. He let out a long sigh and calmed down after a long time. Those old guys had already benefited from it. Seeing that Chinemo was in a bad mood, they didn't have the mood to entertain him. They were all smart guys, so how could they not see through it? Chinemo was the god of fortune. He gave them face by visiting occasionally. After all, the Qin family and the Yi family were in a good relationship. Who dared to offend the Yi family? Then the old guys let Chinemo leave. Chinemo was not unreasonable. He drank 3 cups of wine as an apology and then left. Sitting in old Zhao's car, old Zhao could tell that something was wrong with him. He asked softly, Things didn't go well? He was an elder of the Qin family, so it was reasonable for him to say a few words of concern. Like Auntie Lon, he was considered Chinmo's elder. Chinemo leaned back in his seat and let out a long sigh. Then he said in a low voice, Things are going well, but we encountered some small problems. He held his phone in his hand and touched it gently. He was thinking, to Chinemo his parents were very important. Moreover, as he got older he missed Qin Lu more and more. No news was not good news. If Aijia made a scene, he was afraid that his parents wouldn't be able to take it. Chinemo closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his facial features were as cold as a world of ice and snow. After a long time he finally dialed a number. Who is Aijia? What are your conditions? Aijia was still in the parking lot of the hotel. She was wearing a red dress and had long hair. She was very beautiful and her voice was even more seductive. Chinemo, are you talking about conditions now or are you begging me? New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to pampering. Mobile phone updates are the fastest. Chapter 45-42. Chinemo stared at Aijia. After a long while he said faintly, I never beg anyone for anything. Aijia, if it's a condition, then even if it's a good one, it's not the kind of condition you're thinking of. It's either be honest or don't blame me for being ruthless. Aijia was very sure at first, but now her expression changed completely. She looked at Chinemo as if she had never known this man before. He had never been so heartless to her before. His intention was very clear. He wanted to kill her. Aijia's lips moved. After a long while she said, I don't believe it. You can try and see if you're more important or He Huan. Qin Mo's voice was very cold. To me, you're just a memory of the land of Qin, while He Huan is the woman I'm going to be with. Ai Jia, you're overestimating yourself. To the Qin family, you're a stranger and you're not welcome. After saying that, Qin Mo turned around and walked to his car. In the night, his back was slender. He reached out to open the car door and quickly got in. Ai Jia still hadn't come back to her senses until the car left. In the car, Qin Mo rested his chin on his hand. Although he was very tired, he didn't close his eyes to rest. However, Lao Zhao saw it and asked softly, "That was Miss Ai, right? I've taken her to and from the company twice. She's quite pretty." Qin Mo was a little absent-minded at first, but then he thought of something and said to Lao Zhao, "Don't tell He Huan about what happened today." Lao Zhao showed his loyalty and smiled, "Of course I won't tell anyone." After pausing for a moment, Old Bull looked at the rearview mirror and coughed softly. "Qin Mo, is that Miss Ai you're someone from outside?" "Uncle Zhao, what are you thinking about?" Qin Mo said speechlessly. After a pause, he seemed to remember something and said lightly, "Actually, she's related to the Qin family." When he said that, his voice was a little bleak. Lao Zhao didn't have the guts to ask again. As the car drove on, Qin Mo sat in the back seat with a dark expression. After some time, the car finally stopped in front of the apartment building. Old Zhao parked the car and said softly, "We're here." Qin Mo put down his hand and wiped his face. "We're here. What time is it?" Old Zhao's voice was a little low. "It's almost 12 o'clock. It's so late." Qin Mo took his coat and got out of the car. "I'll drive tomorrow. Uncle Zhao, you can rest for the day." Old Zhao nodded and followed him out of the car, watching him enter the entrance. Qin Mo entered the elevator and the doors slowly closed. He leaned against the elevator wall and quietly looked at the mirror. His reflection in the mirror reflected another face. It was a face that looked almost the same as his, but was no longer in this world. Land of Qin. Qin Mo closed his eyes slightly to hide the pain in them. However, the pain was short-lived because the elevator soon reached his apartment on the top floor. At this time, He Huan should be awake and waiting for him. Before he got out of the elevator, Qin Mo adjusted his emotions and walked out slowly. When he reached the door opened and He Huan's little face popped out. "Qin Mo, did you drink a lot?" "I didn't." Qin Mo smiled faintly and reached out to press her little head down. Then he said in a low voice, "Isn't it dangerous to come out like this? It's already late at night." Like new wife number 1. Hubby, addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Hubby, addicted to spoiling. The updates were the fastest. Chapter 45-43. Of course not. Qin Mo smiled faintly. He reached out to press her little head down and said in a low voice, "Isn't it dangerous to come out like this? It's already late at night." He Huan bit her lip. "It's okay. There are surveillance cameras. I know you're back." After the door closed, she frowned at him. "You smell like smoke and alcohol. Would you like to smell for perfume?" There was a hint of amusement in Qin Mo's voice as he pressed her into his arms. "Little doggy, take a whiff and see if it's there." He Huan felt like she was suffocating. She cried out in his arms, "Qin Mo, you're so bad." Qin Mo was very happy. "Are you going to say it or not, huh?" He Huan got out of his arms and bit her lip pitifully. "Should I be happy that you're drinking and smoking?" As she said that, she tugged at his sleeve and said in a low voice, "Look at you. You've been working so hard these days. Now you're smoking and drinking. Do you think I won't worry about you? You care about me." Qin Mo smiled and his brows relaxed. He Huan was furious. She glared at him and said, "Qin Mo, you're so bad." He didn't know how many times he had asked this question, but he just couldn't find an opportunity. He was so bad. Qin Mo smiled and said, "All right, help me cook a bowl of noodles. You can cook whatever flavor you like to eat." He Huan muttered, "Didn't you say that instant noodles are unhealthy?" "Kissing is unhealthy, but there are still people who do it." Qin Mo smiled faintly and patted her. "Go, I'm really hungry." "Oh," He Huan nodded and left eagerly. When she went downstairs, Qin Mo took off his coat and walked to the French window. He lowered his head and lit a cigarette. He rarely smoked at home, especially when He Huan was around. But today he felt very annoyed. He didn't care about Ai Jia. But if he was ruthless to Aijia, he didn't know if Qin Lu would blame him. Qin Mo leaned against the back of the sofa and looked outside quietly. He actually didn't smoke much. He only lowered his head and was about to put out the cigarette when He Huan came over and bit her lip. You're smoking again. I'm a little annoyed. Let me have a smoke. Qin Mo's voice was hoarse. He Huan bit her lip and did not say a word. She just put the noodles on the dining table and said, It's done. I also added a ham. Qin Mo smiled faintly, then followed her over and sat down. The instant noodles in front of him were especially fragrant after He Huan cooked them. Anyway, it was a little different from usual. Qin Mo took a deep breath. Smells good. Of course, I've done it many times. He Huan sat beside him and handed him the chopsticks. Here, try it. Qin Mo smiled and ruffled her hair before eating. Good girl. I'm not a kitten or a puppy. He Huan snorted and pushed his hand away. Don't be like this. Then what do you want me to be? Qin Mo smiled. Kittens and puppies are good too. They don't have to worry. He Huan sat beside him and held her chin with one hand. She looked at him quietly. After a while she said in a low voice, Qin Mo, is there something on your mind? I feel that there's something wrong with you coming back today. Everything has been settled, hasn't it? His gaze deepened and he smiled. Yes, it's all settled. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Hubby, I'm addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-44. Then what do you want me to be? Qin Mo smiled. Actually, kittens and puppies are pretty good too. You won't have to worry about them. He Huan sat beside him. She supported her chin with one hand and looked at him quietly. After a while she said softly, Qin Mo, is there something on your mind? I feel that there's something wrong with you coming back today. Everything has been resolved, hasn't it? His gaze became a little deep. After a while he smiled and said, Yes, everything has been resolved. He ruffled her hair again. I'll eat the noodles. Do you want to sleep first? I'll wait for you. He Huan's voice was as cute as a little lamb. Qin Mo just smiled and didn't object. He ate very quickly but very elegantly. This was probably a habit brought about by his birth. He Huan looked at him quietly. She thought that Qin Mo was actually very good, but she didn't understand why he insisted on her. When the words insisted on her came out, she was a little stunned again. Insisted on her? So it was because of her. He Huan pursed her lips and then looked at him. There was a touch of moisture in her eyes. Qin Mo finished the last mouthful of noodles and looked at He Huan. Why are you looking at me like that? He Huan's voice was very soft. Qin Mo, why me? His voice was low and hoarse. It was also a little wet. Why would you ask that? He Huan bit her lip. I just want to ask you why me. Isn't this not scientific? Qin Mo smiled. He Huan expressed that it was so. Qin Mo reached out and knocked her. He smiled and said, Is love something that can be solved with science? We were so young back then. How could there be love? He Huan mumbled and then looked at Qin Mo eagerly. Qin Mo patted her head. How old was I when you had your first period? He Huan actually remembered it, but she wanted to pretend that she didn't know. Because he was too despicable. When she was so young he already had some kind of love for her. Who knew if he had other feelings for her? He Huan pretended that he didn't remember. He held his head and groaned. Either he had a headache or he had forgotten. Qin Mo didn't know what to do with her. He reached out and knocked on her little head. Are you stupid? You're only 19 years old. In ancient times you could be a father at this age. Hearing that, He Huan asked him directly, Then who are you going to have a baby with? She couldn't give birth. Therefore he had someone else in mind. Qin Mo's gaze was fixed on her, his eyes sparkling. After a while he chuckled. I can wait for you. For some reason He Huan blushed. Seriously, he was too shameless. It was as if someone was begging him to bear a child. Qin Mo stared at her blushing face and laughed. He teased her intentionally. What's wrong? Are you unhappy? He Huan harumphed. Why would I be unhappy? I'm fine. He laughed and then pinned her little face on his shoulder. He said in a husky voice, He Huan, I only have you. I don't have anyone else. I didn't really do anything with those women who made you angry in the past. Huan froze in his arms. She didn't expect him to say this. This had always been a thorn in her heart. She tried hard to convince herself not to care about it. But today Qin Mo removed it himself. He told her that those women were fake. Chapter 45-45. Huan suddenly had an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was sour and sweet, and even she couldn't describe it. She raised her eyes and looked straight at Qin Mo. He was sitting at the dining table and there were still traces of him going out to socialize. However, his expression was very gentle and the words he said were even gentler. Huan bit her lip, looking helpless. Qin Mo smiled and his voice was very light. Why? I thought you would be very happy when I said this. Why do you look so silly? After a long time she finally came back to her senses. She licked her lips and said in a slightly low voice, Qin Mo, I don't know. You didn't tell me this before. Qin Mo's eyes had a trace of a smile. He reached out and rubbed her hair. You pig brain. What's the point of saying it? I remember I said it more than once. Huan bit her lower lip again and her lip almost bled. Stop biting. It's going to hurt if you bite it. He touched her face and said in a low voice. Huan responded with a and looked rather silly. Qin Mo smiled slightly. Okay, let's go to sleep. Oh. Huan replied with another grin. You look even dumber now. Where's our mighty and awe-inspiring director he? You're going to eat me, Huan said. Qin Mo smiled happily. It doesn't seem to be a problem. I'm your husband, aren't I? Huan didn't know what she was mumbling, but Qin Mo patted her. I'm going to take a shower. You go to sleep first. I want a hug. Huan immediately acted like a spoiled child, and she even took the initiative to put her arms around his neck. Carry me. My feet hurt and I can't walk. Qin Mo was speechless as he lowered his head to look at her. His voice was gentle, helpless and doting. Huan, you're already a grown-up and you still want someone to hug you. Huan doesn't even want someone to hug her anymore. Although he said that, he still carried her to the bedroom. Huan hugged him and said in a sweet voice, But I'm your wife. Didn't you say that I'm little Mrs. Qin and you should spoil me for the rest of my life? Qin Mo pressed his forehead against hers and said in a hoarse voice, Yes, 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 you're right. What I said was right. As Huan spoke, she couldn't help but kiss him. She was a little shy because she rarely took the initiative to get close to him. Qin Mo's expression became gentler. He hugged her and walked to the French window to look at the night sky with her. Careful not to move, she snuggled into his arms. After a long time she whispered to him, Qin Mo. Qin Mo snorted through his nose. Huan looked up at him. Qin Mo, have you ever regretted it? He lowered his head and said in a low voice, How could that be? Never. She didn't ask anymore. In fact, the answer was very simple. It was because she was worth it, because there was only one Huan in this world. If she missed it, there would be no more. After that, they didn't talk anymore. They just looked at the night sky outside together. Occasionally, a meteor would pass by like the path they had walked. Huan said in a low voice, Qin Mo, will always be together, right? Yes. He laughed softly and then pressed against her. He didn't say anything and just pressed against her. Felt good to be together. Even if they didn't do anything, it was still good. As the night sky brightened, Huan fell asleep in his arms. Qin Mo carried her back to the bedroom and carefully placed her on the bed. Looking at her sleeping face, his heart warmed. Like new wife number one. Hubby addicted to spoiling. New wife number one. Hubby addicted to spoiling. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-46. As night fell, Huan fell asleep in his arms. Qin Mo carried her back to the bedroom and carefully placed her on the bed. His heart warmed as he looked at her sleeping face. As long as she was by his side, everything seemed to make him feel at ease. At that moment he realized that they weren't just in love and marriage. Huan was still a part of his life. She was irreplaceable by others. Qin Mo straightened his body and covered her with the blanket. Then he went to take a quick shower. He didn't return to the bedroom directly. Instead, he went to the living room to smoke 2 cigarettes while looking out at the night sky. He was still alone in the same place, but with He Huan around he didn't feel so lonely anymore. Later, when he was sleeping, he whispered into He Huan's ear, "Don't leave again, okay?" No one could answer him. He Huan was in a deep sleep and his breath was sweet. Just like her when they were young. These days Chinamo was really tired. But at that moment she was like a baby beside him and he couldn't fall asleep. He couldn't bear to sleep. He clasped her hand and interlocked his fingers with hers. How long was a lifetime? He was almost 40 years old and he wanted to spend all his time with He Huan. He wanted her to be happy. He wanted her to work, but he couldn't bear to do it. Firstly, it was hard. Secondly, he couldn't bear to part with her. He wanted to see He Huan every day. Chinamo smiled faintly and closed his eyes. In the morning, He Huan opened her eyes. Chinamo was no longer in bed. She immediately sat up, rubbed her eyes and called out Chinmo's name. After about half a minute he walked over. He was wearing a set of home clothes and looked very nice. He leaned against the door and said softly, "It's almost 10. I'll take you back later." He Huan said, "It's almost 10. She paused before asking him softly, "Oh yeah, where are we going?" "Qiu Yuan." Chinmo's voice was calm. "Go pick up Yi Huan and Shenting." He Huan was stunned for a moment before she came back to her senses. She looked at Chinmo blankly. "Is that the child you were talking about?" Chinmo didn't say anything and just smiled. He Huan immediately understood that the child was called Shenting. She covered her face and said, "So fast." Chinmo said calmly, "Actually, it's not that fast." He Huan didn't know that when he confirmed that she couldn't have another child, he had already started to choose. He was indeed unhappy. He Huan still couldn't accept it, but she couldn't change anything. This was the Qin family's perverted rule. She wiped her face and sat up. "I'll be fine soon." Chinmo looked at her and said with a smile in his voice, "Calm down later." He Huan snorted. "How am I not calm? I'm not a country bumpkin who hasn't seen the world." Chinmo glanced at her and then said somewhat happily, "But I feel like you still haven't seen the world." He snorted again to make her understand what he meant. He Huan did understand. She blushed and lifted the blanket to go to the bathroom. "I don't want to talk to you anymore." Chinamo smiled and walked out first. He Huan brushed her teeth, washed her face and changed into a set of clothes before going downstairs. Chinamo sat at the dining table and waved at her. "Come here." She nodded and sat down obediently. After a while she seemed to have thought of something. "Chinamo, what does he look like?" "New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to spoiling." "New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to spoiling. My phone is the fastest to update." Chapter 45-47. Chinamo took out his phone and swiped a photo. He Huan was still a little shocked when she saw the photo. She murmured, "This kid is so good-looking." Chinamo nodded and then said in a low voice, "There are about 20 kids. He's the best-looking and the best in all aspects." He Huan let out a long sigh. "I just think it's a little cruel. If he falls in love with Yi Huan and Yi Huan doesn't like him, won't that be very painful?" Chinmo's voice was indifferent. The education he received will help him adjust himself. That was how cruel it was to live in a wealthy family. He continued, "From now on he'll accompany Yi Huan for 3 years. He'll go abroad when he's 16 and come back when he's 20. If anything happens during these 4 years, no one will be responsible for it. He can only rely on himself, whether it's his career or his love life." Yi Huan listened to him in a daze. After a while she said in a low voice, "Why would he be willing?" Chinamo smiled. "This path that you think is cruel can save him 30 years of hard work. No one can resist such a temptation. It's just a matter of whether he's qualified or not. And Shinting is the lucky one just like you." Hearing this, He Huan realized that she had fallen into his trap. It turned out that he was just praising himself. He Huan glanced at him and said in a low voice like a little lamb, "Chinamo, you're so thick-skinned." He smiled, put his phone away and urged her to eat breakfast before they went out together. When He Huan got into the car she was still worried. "Is there any problem with the screening?" "What problem could there be?" Chinamo smiled. "It's just a matter of greeting." He Huan was relieved when he said that. She didn't say anything else and sat down peacefully letting him drive. An hour later the car arrived at Chiu Garden. Before He Huan could get out of the car, little Yi Huan ran over. She looked like a little boy, but she couldn't help acting like a spoiled child. Mommy. He Huan hadn't seen Xiao Chui for a few days. She missed him so much that she couldn't help but pick him up and kiss him. Did you miss Mommy? Little Yi Huan nodded vigorously. Yes. He Huan smiled. Mom missed you too. After saying that, he kissed her again. But at this time he realized that there was a young man about 13 or 14 years old standing on the steps. Although he was only 13 or 14 years old, he was already about 170 and he looked really good. He Huan was a little angry. She turned her head and whispered to her husband, "The photo you showed me was taken by Enchanting several years ago, right?" The one in front of him was completely different from the one in the photo. Chinamo was a scheming guy. Chinamo chuckled softly. Then his voice was very calm. I didn't say it's a current photo. He Huan was speechless. He was really shameless to the extreme. She tried hard to calm down, put down Yi Huan and held her little hand to walk to Enchanting. She asked in a low voice, "Your name is Enchanting, right?" Enchanting nodded calmly. "Yes, I'll live with you from now on." He paused for a moment. After all, he was a young man and there were some things that he was embarrassed to say. He Huan smiled gently. "Call me Auntie from now on. Call me Uncle Chinamo." After saying that, she reached out and stroked Enchanting's hair. No matter how calm he was actually a child who was not even 15 years old. Like new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to spoiling. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to spoiling. My mobile phone is the fastest to update. Chapter 45-48. When Enchanting heard this, he smiled lightly. His smile was very pretty and he called them uncle and auntie. Chinamo liked this child very much too, so he came over and put his arm around his shoulder. "All right, let's go in." However, Enchanting turned around and took Yi Huan's small hand and held it in his palm. Yi Huan's little face was filled with surprise. She looked at her handsome little brother and then at her father. Chinamo went over and squatted down. He said in a low voice, "Yi Huan, you will be under Enchanting's care from now on. You have to call him Big Brother, okay?" Yi Huan was still confused. "Is Big Brother Daddy and Mommy's son too?" Chinamo smiled. "No, but he will live with us from now on and take care of Yi Huan. Of course, Daddy and Mommy will take care of him too. Do you understand, Yi Huan?" Yi Huan pursed her pretty little lips and looked at Enchanting. She then said very softly, "Is he the same as Big Brother Xiangnan?" This question hit the nail on the head. Chinamo thought about it and answered her, "He is the same." Yi Huan frowned. She felt that her husband was simply too shameless. How could he say something like this? What kind of values did he want to cultivate in Yi Huan? Yi Huan bit her lip and disagreed. However, they were very close now. She could not do anything to Chinamo and could only glare at him. Chinamo chuckled. "Mrs. Chin, why are you staring at me?" Yi Huan ignored him and went into the living room. In the living room, almost everyone from the Qin family had gathered. They were here for Enchanting to enter the Qin family. Enchanting didn't enter the Qin family casually, but he had status. In the future, even if he wasn't with Yi Huan, he would still be considered as Qin Mo's half-son, as long as he was outstanding enough. Sure enough, the formal ceremony was held at noon. Enchanting served tea to all the elders and also received many greeting gifts. Of course, he also prepared a gift for Yi Huan. It was a pony that he had personally made. It was wrapped in pure sheepskin and embedded with many small gems. It was especially beautiful. Yi Huan liked it very much and played upstairs happily. After Enchanting was done with the adults, he went upstairs to spend some time alone with little Yi Huan. As soon as he went upstairs, the adults downstairs began to cordially chat. Qin Chen in particular was most interested in her. Watching the youngster disappear upstairs, he took a sip of his coffee and said lazily, "His temperament is really good and he looks good too. I heard that his schoolwork is even better. His piano skills are no worse than Wen Yuan's. He's only in his teens. How could the family bear to let him go?" Chinamo smiled and didn't say anything. Actually, the Shin family wasn't bad, but they had quite a number of males with good potential. When Chinamo was choosing people, the Shin family had arranged the males in a row. The last person was Enchanting. Enchanting was the least proactive, but after seeing Yi Huan's photo, he changed from being reluctant to being with her to being willing. And Chinamo could understand this feeling very well. Perhaps his elder brother Yi Muyun could understand it even better. Chinamo smiled faintly. He's not bad. He looked at his sister with a strange gaze. It's not like he's not allowed to go home. His surname is still Shin. If Yi Huan were to be with him in the future, King Entertainment might be under the surname Shin, if his ambition was big enough and his means were good enough. These were all unpredictable, but Chinamo was willing to take the risk. Like new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. Please bookmark. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. Play bar updates the fastest. Chapter 45-49. After Chinamo finished speaking, Chin sighed. Chinamo, it's really not easy for you. The Qin family had many children and He Huan couldn't bear more. They could have picked one from the side branches, but each family had their own business and no one came to take over King Entertainment. In the end, it was up to the adorable Yi Huan to shoulder the burden. Qin wasn't stupid. The Qin family and the Yi family had an agreement, but such an agreement could change even if they got married in the future. Hence, Ting's existence was very necessary. Chinamo was really sinister. Qin thought of this and looked at his brother again. Chinamo had already gone to pour He Huan some milk. Qin sighed secretly. Ting's future was going to be difficult. His opponent was Yi Xiangnan. The Yi family's children were all not easy to deal with. Internally there was still Yi Huan. It was hard to say whether Yi Huan would grow up to be strong. No matter what, Ting was a special existence. His relationship with Yi Huan wasn't like that of Yi Muyun and Tang Sher back then. Chinamo was much more unkind than Tang Yu. But no amount of worry and speculation could stop the little warmth upstairs. Ting pushed open a children's room. It was a pink world. Qin Yi Huan was wearing a little boy's clothes, but she was obsessed with the pony. She was swaying back and forth happily. Ting walked over and bent his knees beside her. He said in a low voice, "You like it a lot?" Yi Huan was still swaying back and forth, looking especially happy. She looked up at Ting with her big and cute eyes, as if there were many little stars in them. Ting's gaze landed on her little face. He looked at her quietly. The youth's face and eyes seemed to be filled with a vast starry sky. It was very deep and so calm that it didn't look like something someone his age should have. He gazed at Yi Huan and finally reached out to touch her eyes gently. He said in a low voice, "Your eyes are very beautiful." Little Yi Huan shook her head but didn't avoid him. Instead she asked him curiously, "Brother, do you think my clothes are ugly? The kids in the kindergarten all say that my hair is ugly like it was gnawed by a dog and my clothes are ugly." Ting smiled. "As long as you like it." Yi Huan opened her eyes wide and seemed to be thinking. After a while she nodded heavily and said, "I think so." Ting smiled again and touched her head. Yi Huan smiled at him and called him big brother. After a while, he corrected, "Brother Ting. Is there a difference?" Little Yi Huan, who was only 7 years old, did not understand this at all. Ting did not intend to tell her about his intentions. After all, she was too young. She was probably the kind that would hug a milk bottle at night. At the thought of this he laughed. What a little girl, but it didn't matter. He could slowly wait for her to grow up, and in the process he could do a lot of things. Moreover, Ting knew about the existence of Yi Xiangnan. Such an existence was a lot of pressure for a man, let alone a youth. However, he was rarely calm. This was also the reason why Chinamo chose him out of so many people. In B City, Ting's excellence was also one of the best. And such an outstanding youth fell in love with Yi Huan at first sight. He was willing to gamble with everything he had and he would not lose. Never, never. Like new wife number 1. Husband addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Husband addicted to pampering. The updates were the fastest. Chapter 45-50. He didn't explain too much to Yi Huan. He just reached out and stroked the little girl's hair. Yi Huan was still playing happily. In the end she didn't want to play anymore and Ting carried her down. Little Yi Huan looked at him eagerly. "Brother Ting, you're so tall." He nodded. "I'm a high school student now," she exclaimed again. Actually, she didn't know what it meant for a 13-year-old Ting to go to high school. However, she was still young and didn't understand. He didn't care too much. He just wanted to accompany her. Looking at her busy little figure, seeing how happy she looked, and seeing how she was dressed like a little boy with her hair cut short, he knew that she was doing this for a boy called Yi Xiannan. He was a little younger than him, equally outstanding, and had a proud family background. It wasn't that Enchanting didn't care. He was just a teenager and he had learned to endure. This was probably the price he had to pay. Between riches and Qin Yi Huan, he would rather choose Qin Yi Huan. However, he knew that if he couldn't fulfill a certain requirement and obtain riches, he wouldn't be able to have her. 3 years. He would accompany her for these 3 years. Yi Huan didn't understand what he was thinking. She only knew that little big brother was very good-looking and she liked him very much. Later, Enchanting held Yi Huan's hand as they went downstairs for lunch. Although it looked like he was holding a little boy's hand, they looked very harmonious when they were together. Everyone in the Qin family saw this and couldn't help but agree with Qin Chen's words. This child, Enchanting, seemed to have a very noble air. When it came to a big family like the Qin family, they were very well behaved. Qin Anlin naturally sat at the head of the table. On his left and right were Qin Mo, Qin Chen and Qin Mu respectively. On Qin Mo's side, the important seat was not Yi Huan but Enchanting. Yi Huan sat beside Enchanting. She looked so cute and needed care. Enchanting was young and outstanding, but he had never taken care of anyone before, let alone a baby. But he was very proper and very attentive. Very quickly, he skillfully took care of Yi Huan without batting an eyelid, as if he was very ordinary. Even Yi Huan did not realize that she was being taken care of. She ate happily and seemed to be happier than usual. The adults did not make a sound, quietly sizing up the quiet youth. Enchanting was really calm. In front of so many big shots in the business world, he was really impressive. After dinner, the men of the Qin family gathered together. Qin Anlin kept saying, "The younger generation will surpass the older." Then he looked at his son. "Qin Mo, what are your plans? Are you going to be like your elder brother?" Qin Mo did not answer and only smiled faintly. Yi Huan happened to be at the door and heard it too. She was a little surprised and even more shocked. She had more or less guessed it. She subconsciously called his name. Qin Mo turned his head and saw Yi Huan. He smiled faintly. "Why are you here? Where are Qin Mu and the rest?" "Oh, they are still having afternoon tea. They just wanted me to ask if we are having dinner here or going back separately," Yi Huan said softly. Qin Mo's voice was low. "Go back and eat. Bring the kids to the villa later." Yi Huan nodded and went out. When she walked out, she saw Enchanting standing there. She was stunned for a moment. Like new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. My mobile phone updates are the fastest. Chapter 45-51. Qin Mo's voice was low. "Let's go back and eat. We'll bring the kids to the villa later." Yi Huan nodded and headed out. She saw Enchanting standing there the moment she stepped out. Yi Huan pursed her lips slightly and said gently, "We'll be going home soon. Oh yeah, did you bring any luggage?" Enchanting said yes and quickly brought the luggage down. Yi Huan had probably been a mother for a long time. She realized that he only had one suitcase, so he must have brought very few clothes. She thought about it and said, "Uncle Qin and I will bring you to get some clothes later. You can take a look at the decorations in the bedroom. You can change them if you like them." Enchanting did not reject her. It was not because he was a demanding person but because he wanted to enter this family. He could not be too polite. Moreover, it was still the holidays. They could get to know each other better if they went out together. He was a stranger to Auntie and Yi Huan. Enchanting's agreement made Yi Huan heave a sigh of relief. She was afraid that this child would be too outstanding and arrogant. Now that he was easy to get along with, she felt more at ease. Moreover, what she heard in the study made her take note of Enchanting. After all, Qin Mo might choose Enchanting. Moreover, Yi Huan was with him day in and day out, so she wanted to distance herself from him. Yi Huan realized that her mind was in a mess and she could not wrap her head around it. Finally, they got into the car. She sat in the front while the two kids sat in the back. Yi Huan was probably a little tired from playing. She leaned on Enchanting's shoulder and called out, "Big brother," before falling asleep comfortably. Enchanting lowered his head. The young man's clear eyes flashed with warmth. He gazed at the little thing for a moment before looking up. Then he could not help but reach out and touch her hair. It was short but soft. Yi Huan saw all this from the rearview mirror. She looked at Chin Emo worriedly. Chin Emo noticed his wife's worried gaze and gaze. He smiled and placed his hand on the back of her hand to comfort her. Yi Huan wanted to ask something, but she remembered that the two kids were in the back seat, so she held back. Chin Emo drove the car to the villa under Yi Huan's name. He opened the car door and got out. He wanted to hug Yi Huan, but Shin Ting had already opened the car door. Yi Huan's coat was already on and buttoned up. Shin Ting carried little Yi Huan, who was asleep, out of the car carefully. He was very tall, and although he was a little thin, it seemed very easy for him to carry a little baby. Yi Huan wanted to say something again, but this time, Chin Emo put his hand on her shoulder and smiled. See, it'll be easier now. We have a little helper. Shin Ting walked in front. The young man's slender back seemed especially tall and strong and also very noble. Shin Ting asked softly, "Is Yi Huan's room on the second floor?" The servant stammered, "In the far east." Shin Ting nodded and went up. Yi Huan and Chin Emo stood downstairs and watched anxiously. Yi Huan sounded like she was dreaming. "Chin Emo, does this look familiar?" Chin Emo clearly knew, but he pretended not to know. He smiled and said, "How is it familiar?" Yi Huan bit her lip and looked at her husband silently for a while. After a long time she said in a low voice, "You clearly know, but you are still pretending. You are the best at pretending." Chin Emo was a little amused and asked deliberately, "How am I pretending?" New wife number 1, hubby addicted to pampering. New wife number 1, hubby addicted to pampering. My phone was the fastest to update. Chapter 45-52. Yi Huan snorted. "I don't want to talk to you." "Who are you going to talk to if you don't want to talk to me?" Chin Emo chuckled. "Oh yes, Yi Huan won't wake up until 2 hours after her afternoon nap. You should take a nap too. You must be exhausted after all these days." Yi Huan nodded and looked at him. "What about you? Do you want to take a break too?" Chin Emo smiled. "Okay, I'll take a nap with you." Although it was an afternoon nap, Yi Huan still took a shower first. She changed into a bathrobe and walked to the vanity to apply some skincare products. Chin Emo, who was originally leaning against the sofa, came over and leaned over from behind. "You're going to do all this too?" Yi Huan said softly while putting on the makeup. "I ate too much oil at noon. I'll feel better after taking a shower." She thought about it and turned to look at Chin Emo. "What are you thinking? Are you going to give Yi Huan to Shin Ting?" Chin Emo looked at his little wife. Yi Huan still looked young, but he was already preparing for Yi Huan's future. He had to plan this way. Chin Emo thought for a while and said in a low voice, "Do you know why Shin Ting?" Yi Huan didn't say anything and waited quietly for his answer. After a long time, Chin Emo said slowly, "Because Shin Ting has R-negative blood. That's the main reason he won. Of course he's also excellent, more excellent than anyone else, but that's why I noticed him." Yi Huan felt that it was cruel. She put down the skincare products in her hand and asked softly, "Does Shin Ting know?" "He knows." Chin Emo hugged her from behind and said in a low voice, "Yi Huan, it's not cruel. It's just a probability. It means that there's a high chance they'll be together in the future." He had given up on Yi Xiangnan because of his blood type. Besides, Yi Xiangnan's identity meant that he couldn't give up everything for Yi Huan, but Shin Ting could. That was cruel. He didn't tell Yi Huan about it because he didn't want to scare her. Yi Huan was still in a daze and did not speak for a long time. Chin Emo smiled. "Relax, the children are still young. This is also a matter for the future. You are too impatient to think so much now." Yi Huan looked at him and said in a low voice, "You've already brought Shin Ting back, yet you say that I'm anxious. It's obvious that you're the anxious one." Chin Emo just smiled and comforted her for a while before coaxing her to take a nap. When she fell asleep, he couldn't fall asleep. It was Shin Ting's first time here, so he had to go and take a look. Finally, she found him in Yi Huan's room. Chin Emo stared at her silently for a while before whispering, "I'm going to check out your room." Shin Ting looked up and immediately stood up. "Uncle." Chin Emo smiled and went out first. Shin Ting took another look at the little cutie before he quietly followed him and carefully closed the door. His room was next to Yi Huan's. It was also a suite with a bathroom, changing room, and a study. It was very well equipped and the servants had already packed his luggage. Just as Yi Huan had expected, There weren't many clothes, just a few sets of clothes. The room was decorated in a more mature style, not the lively style that the youngster usually liked. If you don't like it, you can get someone else to change it. Also, arrange for your room to be renovated in every villa. You will be with Yi Huan, Chinamo said calmly. And Shinting understood what he meant. Like new wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. New wife number 1. Hubby addicted to pampering. My mobile phone updates are the fastest. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.